I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor, but I could not open my eyes. I could not move a single muscle in my body. I was completely trapped in darkness. Then I heard the heavy door to my hospital room swing open. I waited for the sound of crying. I waited for someone to hold my hand. Instead, I heard my mother walk right up to my bed, let out a heavy sigh, and whisper, "Is it time to pull the plug yet? Jason better have those asset transfers ready." I was screaming inside my own mind, but my body stayed perfectly still. Thank God it did. Because what happened next gave me the ultimate weapon. My name is Alyssa. I am 34 years old and I run a cybersecurity firm. Before I tell you how I destroyed the people who literally tried to bury me, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a toxic family. The darkness was absolute and terrifying. My mind was awake and sharp and racing with a million thoughts, but my physical body was a dead weight. I tried to flutter my eyelids. Nothing happened. I tried to twitch my fingers. Nothing. The sharp, sterile smell of medical bleach and rubbing alcohol burned my nostrils. The rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a ventilator filled the silent room, and I realized with a wave of pure terror that it was breathing for me. I felt the cold plastic of an intravenous tube taped to the back of my hand. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only proof that I was still alive. My memories were fractured. Rain on a windshield, the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal wrapping around me. I had been driving home from my office in downtown Chicago. Then there was nothing. Now I was a prisoner inside my own skull. The medical term for this condition is locked-in syndrome. It means your brain functions perfectly, but a traumatic injury has severed the communication to your muscles. You are a ghost haunting your own flesh. I wanted to thrash and sob and beg for a doctor, but my face remained an expressionless mask. The door opened with the squeak of heavy hinges. The sharp and rapid clicking of designer heels echoed across the linoleum floor. I knew that walk anywhere. It was my mother, Patricia. Relief washed over me for a fraction of a second. My mother was here. She would call the doctors. She would notice that my brain activity was spiking, but she did not lean in to kiss my forehead. She did not sob or pray over my broken body. Instead, I heard the rustle of a leather handbag being tossed carelessly onto the plastic visitor chair. Then came her voice. It was cold and annoyed and completely devoid of grief. "Is it time to pull the plug yet? Jason better have those asset transfers ready." The words hit me harder than the car crash. I felt a cold dread pool in my stomach. She was talking about my husband. She was talking about my assets. My mother sighed heavily, making a sound of profound inconvenience. $30 for parking in this garage, she muttered to herself, pacing at the foot of my bed. $30 a day to come up here and look at a vegetable. If she does not pass soon, this hospital is going to drain whatever is left in her accounts before Jason can even secure the deeds. My heart monitor must have spiked, but if it did, Patricia did not care. I lay there trapped in my silent cage, listening to the woman who gave birth to me complain about parking fees while I fought for every breath. It was a shattering realization. All my life, I had tried to earn her love. I had built a successful cybersecurity company from the ground up, hoping just once she would look at me with the pride she reserved exclusively for my younger sister, Melanie. Melanie was the golden child. She was spoiled and manipulative and constantly bailed out of financial ruin by my parents. I was the scapegoat. I was the bank account they tapped into whenever Melanie maxed out her credit cards. I had finally stopped giving them money last year, setting a firm boundary to protect my own peace. I knew Patricia was angry about that, but I never imagined her resentment ran deep enough to wish for my death. She stepped closer to my bed. I could smell her expensive floral perfume masking the scent of the hospital antiseptics. "You always had to be so stubborn, Alyssa," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You always had to prove you were smarter than everyone else. You thought you could just cut us off, cut your own sister off. Well, look at you now. You are not so powerful lying there hooked up to a wall outlet." The malice in her tone was suffocating. I realized then that she was not just waiting for me to die, she was actively celebrating it. She was treating my tragic accident like a convenient business opportunity. I tried to scream. I tried to force a single tear out of my closed eyes, but my body refused to obey. I heard her pull out her cell phone and dial a number. She tapped her manicured nails impatiently against the metal rail of my hospital bed. "Pick up the phone, Jason," she hissed into the receiver. "Where are you?" "The doctor said they need the medical proxy paperwork finalized by Friday. We cannot authorize the removal of the ventilator until you sign those papers as her husband." She paused, listening to a voicemail greeting. She groaned in frustration. "Call me back immediately. Melanie said you were going to the house to find the corporate documents. Do not mess this up. We are so close. We just need her gone so we can finally fix this financial mess." She ended the call and tossed her phone back into her purse. She stood over me for one more minute. I could feel her cold stare. She did not touch my hand. She did not say goodbye. She just grabbed her bag and walked out, leaving me entirely alone with the rhythmic and mocking hiss of the ventilator. The betrayal was absolute. It was a venom that seeped into my veins, replacing my fear with something entirely different. A cold and calculated rage filled my chest. My own mother and my husband were plotting to end my life, to steal everything I had built. They thought I was an empty shell. They thought my mind was gone. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. I was a cybersecurity expert. I spent my entire career finding vulnerabilities in complex systems and destroying threats from the inside out. I was not going to die in this bed. I was going to survive. I was going to wake up. And when I did, I was going to dismantle their entire lives piece by piece. The heavy door to my room swung open once again. I expected a nurse or a doctor to check my vitals. Instead, I heard two distinct sets of footsteps. The first was the tread of dress shoes. The second was a click of ankle boots. I knew those sounds instantly. It was Jason, my husband, and Melanie, my younger sister. My heart monitor maintained its steady mechanical rhythm, belying the shock flooding my system. Jason walked up to the side of my bed. I felt the mattress shift slightly as he leaned against the metal railing. Melanie stopped right beside him. I waited for my husband to speak, to stroke my hair, or to show any sign of the grieving partner he pretended to be in public. I felt a hand brush against my cheek, but the touch was rough and dismissive. "You are sure she cannot hear us, right?" Melanie whispered, her voice trembling with a sickening mix of excitement and anxiety. "The neurologist said she has zero brain activity," Jason replied, his tone flat and devoid of empathy. "She is basically a piece of furniture at this point. The accident scrambled everything inside her head. We are alone in here." What happened next made the blood run cold. I heard the rustle of fabric shifting. Then came the unmistakable sound of mouths meeting. They were kissing. My husband and my sister were kissing next to the machine that was pumping oxygen into my lungs. The audacity of their betrayal was a physical blow. The scent of Melanie's vanilla body spray mixed with Jason's cologne. I was forced to lie there completely motionless as the two people I had trusted most desecrated my hospital room with their secret affair. "I cannot wait until this is all over," Melanie sighed, pulling away from him. "I am so tired of sneaking around behind her back." "We will not have to sneak around longer," Jason muttered. "But we have a serious problem right now. I spent 4 hours tearing the house apart yesterday. I hacked into her laptop. I went through every single financial document I could find in her home office." "What is wrong?" Melanie asked, her voice tightening with sudden anxiety. "Her main checking account only has $50,000, Jason said. His voice was rising with panic. $50,000, Melanie. That is nothing. I owe my creditors almost $800,000. I owe people you do not want to cross." We cut the brake lines on her car for $50,000. The revelation dropped like an anvil. It was not an accident. It was attempted murder. My husband had tampered with my car. I replayed the crash. The realization that the brake pedal was dead beneath my foot as my car hurtled toward the barrier. It was not a mechanical failure. Jason had orchestrated this to wipe out his gambling debts and fund a life with my sister. You told me she was wealthy, Melanie hissed. You said her cybersecurity company was worth a fortune. You promised me we would be set for life if we just got her out of the picture. She is wealthy, Jason shot back. I know she is, but I cannot find the rest of the money anywhere. She must have hidden it in some corporate ghost account or locked it behind an encrypted firewall. She was always paranoid about digital security. That is her job. But 50,000 is all I can access right now. We need her to die so I can inherit the company and liquidate the assets. If she lingers in this coma, the hospital bills will eat through that 50,000. Then we stick to the plan, Melanie said coldly. Mom is already on board. She wants Alyssa gone just as much as we do. Mom told me she is going to push the doctors to authorize pulling the plug next week. You just need to have the medical power of attorney paperwork ready to sign. I will have it ready, Jason promised. I will sign whatever it takes to end this. They kissed again, a quick and cruel seal on their murderous pact. Then they turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone. If I could have smiled, I would have laughed. Jason thought he was brilliant. He thought he had outmaneuvered me by tampering with my brakes and seducing my jealous sister. He was panicking over $50,000. He had no idea about my masterpiece. My family always underestimated my career path. They thought running a cybersecurity firm meant fixing computer glitches. They did not understand the scale of what I actually did. 2 months before the crash, I had engineered a groundbreaking artificial intelligence protocol. It was a revolutionary defense algorithm capable of predicting and neutralizing cyber threats. I had quietly shopped the patent to a defense contractor. The deal closed in total secrecy just weeks before Jason cut my brake lines. I sold the patent for $12 million. $12 million that Jason and Melanie would never see. The funds were not sitting in a checking account. They were not tied to the company assets Jason planned to liquidate. I had transferred every penny into an offshore trust account, secured behind military-grade encryption. The only way to access that money was through a series of biometric passkeys and secondary authentication protocols that existed in my head. Jason could tear the house apart 100 times. He could hire every hacker in the city. He would never find that $12 million. They wanted to pull the plug next week. They thought my silence meant I was defeated. They thought I was a vegetable waiting to be discarded so they could steal my life. But my mind was a steel trap, and I held the ultimate leverage. The clock was ticking to my execution, but I had 12 million reasons to fight my way out of this paralyzed shell. The next afternoon, the heavy door swung open again, bringing a new combination of footsteps. This time it was Jason and my mother. I braced myself for another wave of toxicity. They stood at the foot of my bed, speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones. How much longer is this going to drag out? Jason, Patricia demanded. The hospital administrator called me this morning. The insurance coverage maxes out soon, and I am not paying a single dime out of pocket to keep a corpse breathing. Relax, Patricia, Jason said smoothly. I spoke with the lawyers today. The medical power of attorney kicks in completely by Monday, but we cannot pull the plug yet. We need her alive until Friday. Friday. Why Friday? She snapped. Because of the corporate transfer documents, Jason explained, his voice dripping with greed. Alyssa's cybersecurity firm is structured with ironclad corporate fail-safes. If she dies before I secure the primary equity, the board of directors assumes temporary control. They will freeze the assets and launch an immediate audit. I cannot survive a financial audit, Patricia. I need the forged signatures stamped and filed while she is legally incapacitated, but technically alive. My guy says the forgery will take exactly 3 more days to process through the back channels. By Friday afternoon, the company is mine. Then we authorize the ventilator removal on Friday evening. A strict, high-stakes deadline was now hanging over my head. Friday. I had less than 1 week to break out of a paralyzed shell, or I would be legally murdered by my own husband and mother. Fine. Patricia agreed, sounding terribly inconvenienced. Friday evening. I will start looking into cheap cremation services today. I am absolutely not wasting money on a lavish funeral. Melanie needs that capital for her wedding. They actually laughed. A sharp, cruel sound that echoed off the sterile hospital walls. Let us go grab a coffee, Jason said. The smell of this room is giving me a massive headache. Their footsteps retreated, and the heavy door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone with the mechanical hiss of the ventilator. The silence in the room was deafening. Friday. The word pulsed in my brain like a blaring warning siren. I had spent my entire adult life writing complex code, building impenetrable firewalls, and solving impossible digital puzzles. Now my own body was a locked system, and I needed to hack my central nervous system. I focused all my conscious energy on my right hand. I visualized the neural pathways connecting my brain to my fingertips. I commanded my muscles to move. Nothing happened. Panic flared in my chest, fighting against the regulated rhythm of the breathing machine. I pushed the panic down with brutal force. Panic was a waste of precious energy. I needed absolute focus. I isolated every wandering thought, narrowing my entire universe down to my right pinky finger. Move. Just move. Hours seemed to pass in this silent, agonizing battle. The mental exertion was completely exhausting. I felt trapped under an invisible ocean of concrete. My mind screamed at my nerves, sending electric signals down a broken spine. Move. Sweat would have beaded on my forehead if my autonomic system was working properly. Instead, the manual effort was entirely invisible. I thought about Jason forging my name on documents I had worked years to build. I thought about Melanie wearing my clothes and laughing in my house. I thought about Patricia comparing my funeral costs to her favorite daughter's wedding budget. The pure, unadulterated rage acted as a catalyst. A hot, searing energy shot down my arm, bridging the severed connection. Suddenly, a tiny, miraculous sensation registered. A muscle fiber twitched. Then the tip of my right pinky finger brushed against the rough cotton of the hospital blanket. It was a physical movement so incredibly small it would barely register on a seismograph, but to me it was the equivalent of a nuclear explosion. I had finally breached the firewall. I was no longer completely paralyzed. Just as I managed a second deliberate twitch, the door eased open. Soft rubber-soled shoes squeaked against the linoleum. It was not the sharp heels of my mother or the heavy dress shoes of my husband. It was Brenda, the night shift nurse. I recognized her gentle humming and the comforting smell of lavender soap she always used. She walked over to check my intravenous line, carefully adjusting the fluid flow. I summoned every ounce of willpower I possessed. I forced my right pinky finger to twitch again, tapping against the plastic rail of the bed. Tap, tap. Brenda froze in place. The humming stopped abruptly. She leaned over, her face hovering directly above mine. I poured all my remaining energy into my eyelids. With an agonizing physical effort, I broke the seal of my paralysis and fluttered my eyes open. The bright fluorescent lights blinded me for a second, but my vision quickly focused on Brenda's stunned face. "Oh my God." Brenda breathed softly, her eyes widening in pure shock. "Alyssa, can you hear me?" I could not move my neck to nod. I could not open my jaw to speak. But I had my eyes. I blinked once, deliberately. "You are awake," she whispered, reaching eagerly for the call button to summon the doctors. "I need to page the neurologist immediately. I need to call your family." Absolute panic surged through my veins. If she called my family, Jason would know I was waking up. He would find a way to accelerate his timeline. He would smother me with a pillow before Friday ever arrived. I had to stop her right now. I stared intensely into Brenda's eyes and blinked twice rapidly. "No." She paused, her hand hovering inches over the red plastic button. "You do not want me to call them?" she asked, her voice laced with heavy confusion. I blinked once. Yes, I had learned Morse code during a high school cryptography camp years ago. It was a desperate long shot, but I had to try. I stared directly at her and began to blink in deliberate, measured sequences. Dash, dot, dot, dash, dash, dash. Brenda stared at me, completely captivated by the strange rhythm. "Are you trying to tell me something?" I blinked once for yes. I repeated the sequence, focusing all my desperation into the visual movement. Dash, dot, dot, dash, 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 D-O, dash, dot, dash, 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 N-O-T. Brenda was a seasoned medical professional. She had seen countless trauma patients try to communicate. She pulled a pen from her scrub pocket and grabbed a clean paper towel from the metal tray. "Do it again," she whispered, her eyes fixed intensely on mine. I blinked the sequence again, spelling it out letter by agonizing letter. DONOTTELLTHEM. Brenda wrote the letters down with a shaking hand. She stared at the paper towel and then looked back at me. The color completely drained from her face as she realized the dark gravity of my request. A patient waking from a coma was a medical miracle. A patient begging a nurse to hide that miracle from her own husband and mother was a massive red flag indicating imminent danger. "They want to hurt you, Brenda," whispered her voice barely audible over the hissing ventilator. I blinked once firmly. "Yes." Brenda looked at the heavy door, then back at me. She slowly pulled her hand away from the call button and tucked the pen back into her pocket. The secret alliance was born in that quiet, sterile room, setting the stage for my ultimate survival. The darkness began to recede. Motor functions returned in slow increments. Doctors removed my breathing tube, charting it as a spontaneous reflex. They told my family I breathed independently, but remained in a vegetative state. They had no idea my brain was firing on all cylinders. During silent graveyard shifts, my recovery began. Brenda became my lifeline. I regained movement in my fingers, then hands, and finally my vocal cords. My voice was a harsh whisper when I finally spoke. Brenda leaned in close. I needed absolute loyalty and knew compassion alone would not risk her medical license. I appealed to something stronger. "Brenda," I croaked, "my family is planning to kill me by Friday. They are forging documents to steal my company, keep my recovery off the charts. No notes, no updates, no accidental slips." Brenda adjusted my pillows. "Alyssa, I could lose my job. I could go to prison. Oh. If physicians find out I am hiding a cognitive recovery, they will destroy me. I have a daughter starting college next month. I cannot lose everything." I knew exactly what to say. "You will not lose everything," I whispered, forcing my eyes to meet hers. "You will gain more than you ever make in a lifetime at this hospital. Grab your phone, open your digital wallet." She hesitated, glancing nervously at the closed door, before pulling her smartphone from her scrub pocket. I closed my eyes and accessed the vault of my memory. As a cybersecurity founder, I never trusted physical drives with my emergency funds. I kept a ghost wallet secured by a 24-word seed phrase memorized through a mnemonic palace technique. "Type this in," I instructed, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. I recited the string of complex alphanumeric codes and bypass keys. Brenda's fingers flew across the screen. When the transfer cleared, she gasped, dropping the phone onto my blanket. I had just wired her $250,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency. "Consider that a retainer," I said, my gaze locking onto her terrified but amazed expression. "Keep me off the radar until Friday and I will double it. If Jason succeeds, he will not just kill me. He will liquidate my assets and fire hundreds of innocent employees. You are not just saving my own life, Brenda. You are securing your daughter's future." She stared at the digital balance on her screen, then looked back at me. A new resolve hardened in her eyes. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and nodded firmly. "You are officially unresponsive and severely brain damaged," she whispered. "Nobody finds out until you say so." The financial transactions sealed our pact, but executing the deception during the daylight hours was a psychological minefield. I quickly realized that the hospital walls had ears. Jason had tipped the daytime nursing staff to give him updates, and Patricia was constantly hovering in the corridors trying to eavesdrop on the doctors. I had to become the ultimate actress. Whenever the heavy door squeaked open during visiting hours, I retreated into my paralyzed shell. I let my jaw go slack. I allowed a line of drool to pool at the corner of my mouth. I kept my eyes open but unfocused, staring blankly at the ceiling tiles, as if my mind had been entirely wiped away. The humiliation of playing a brain-damaged victim was agonizing but absolutely necessary. On Wednesday afternoon, Jason and Melanie walked into my room. I could feel their presence like a sudden drop in room temperature. Jason leaned over my bed, waving a hand in front of my face. I did not blink. I did not flinch. "She is completely vacant," Melanie muttered, chewing on her fingernail. "The doctor said her motor functions might twitch randomly, but there is nobody home upstairs. Are you sure the paperwork will hold up if she is like this?" "It is perfect," Jason replied, his voice brimming with arrogant confidence. "Amnesia and cognitive failure are exactly what we need. If she were dead, the corporate board would freeze the accounts. But an incapacitated wife leaves me as the sole legal proxy. I just need to guide her hand to sign the medical release and the equity transfer tomorrow." Patricia entered the room a moment later, carrying a stale cup of cafeteria coffee. She looked down at me with an expression of pure disgust. "God, she looks pathetic," Patricia sneered. "To think I wasted so much money on her piano lessons and braces growing up just for her to end up a drooling mess." "Well, at least she is finally being useful." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to sit up to slap the coffee out of her hand to tell them I knew exactly what they were doing. My heart rate threatened to spike, which would trigger the monitors and give away my ruse. I utilized a deep breathing technique I had learned during stress management training, slowing my pulse, forcing the monitor to remain steady and rhythmic. I played the empty vessel perfectly. They discussed their impending wealth right in front of me. They debated whether to sell my house to a developer or let Melanie move in permanently. They argued over which luxury cars they would buy once the corporate assets cleared. It was a masterclass in human greed. They felt so incredibly and utterly safe in their deception. They were completely convinced that my mind was erased and my spirit was broken. But as they turned their backs to leave the room for the afternoon, I allowed my eyes to track their retreating figures. They were setting the stage for their own destruction. They were handing me all the evidence of premeditated fraud and malicious intent I could ever need. I just had to silently endure the humiliation a little longer. The Amnesia Act was working flawlessly, making my enemies dangerously overconfident. Friday was approaching fast, and my trap was nearly set. Thursday morning arrived with suffocating heaviness. The door swung open to reveal Jason, flanked by the attending neurologist and two medical residents. The moment they crossed the threshold, Jason transformed. His posture slumped, and his face crumpled into a mask of pure, devastated grief. He rushed to the side of my bed, grabbing my limp hand in both of his. He pressed my fingers to his lips, acting like a man shattered by tragedy. "Doctor, please tell me there is some improvement," Jason pleaded, his voice breaking with a perfectly calibrated sob. "I cannot lose her. She is my entire world." The neurologist offered a sympathetic sigh. "I am sorry, Jason. Her vital signs are stable, but the neurological scans confirm severe and widespread cognitive damage. She is experiencing profound amnesia and a total loss of higher brain function. The lights are on, but nobody is home. She feels no pain, but she processes no reality." Jason buried his face in my hospital blankets, his shoulders shaking with fake tears. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. If I had not heard him plotting my murder with my own sister just yesterday, I might have genuinely believed him. I kept my eyes wide and vacant, staring blankly at the fluorescent light fixture above. I allowed my jaw to hang slack, letting a thin trail of saliva gather at the corner of my mouth. The intense humiliation burned hot in my chest, but I remained perfectly still, playing a hollow shell for them to pity. The medical team offered their final condolences and quietly filed out of the room. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. The transformation was instantaneous. Jason dropped my hand like it was diseased. He wiped his fake tears away and checked his luxury watch. A second later, the door opened again, and Patricia strode in with Melanie following close behind. "Are the doctors gone?" Patricia asked, dropping her heavy designer coat carelessly onto the visitor chair. "They just left," Jason replied, smoothing the wrinkles out of his tailored suit. "They bought the entire act. They confirmed she is a total vegetable. We have absolute clearance to proceed with the legal paperwork." Patricia walked slowly toward the side of my bed. She leaned over me, blocking out the harsh overhead light. She reached out with a manicured hand and began to stroke my hair. To anyone looking through the small glass window in the door, it would appear as a tender gesture of deep maternal love. But her face was twisted into a cruel, mocking sneer. "Look at you," Patricia whispered, her voice slick with poisonous delight. "My brilliant little cybersecurity genius. Always thinking you were better than the rest of us. Always looking down your nose at Melanie just because you built a technology company. I told you that your stubborn independence would ruin you eventually. You should have just shared your wealth with your family. Now you are going to die in a diaper, and we are going to take everything anyway." She brushed a strand of hair away from my forehead, her sharp acrylic nails scraping deliberately and painfully against my scalp. It was pure psychological torture. She wanted to degrade me, to strip away every single ounce of human dignity I had left. I focused my vision intensely on a tiny brown water stain on the ceiling tile directly above her head. I forced my breathing to remain incredibly shallow and rhythmic. I could not react. I could not blink away the furious sting in my eyes. I had to deeply internalize the sheer viciousness of her gaslighting without moving a single muscle. "Enough gloating." Patricia Jason interrupted, loudly opening his sleek leather briefcase on the rolling bedside table. "We have a strict timeline to keep. I need her signature on these corporate equity transfer documents right now. The board of directors is getting suspicious, and I need to solidify my status as the sole majority shareholder before tomorrow evening." Jason pulled out a thick stack of dense legal papers and a heavy fountain pen. He moved aggressively to the side of the bed and forcefully lifted my right arm. His grip was bruising and impatient. I felt the cold metal of the pen being wedged roughly between my thumb and index finger. "Come on, Alyssa," Jason muttered aggressively, positioning the sharp tip of the pen over the dotted signature line. "Just one little scribble. Make yourself useful for the first time in your miserable life." This was a clumsy, brute force attack. He was trying to physically manipulate my paralyzed muscles to forge legal consent. But he was vastly underestimating the physical mechanics of a truly limp body. I let all the residual tension drain completely from my shoulder down through my elbow and into my wrist. I became absolute dead weight. When Jason tried to drag my hand across the thick paper, my fingers completely gave out. The heavy pen slipped effortlessly from my grasp and tumbled onto the sterile floor, rolling far under the hospital bed. "Damn it," Jason hissed violently, kicking the metal frame of the bed. "She is completely flaccid. I cannot make it look like a natural signature. The ink lines are too shaky and disjointed." "Just guide her hand tighter," Melanie suggested, stepping forward to grab my wrist. I tried. Jason snapped, his mounting frustration boiling over into rage. The neurologist just officially documented her as severely cognitively impaired. If I submit a signature that looks even slightly coerced, the corporate lawyers will flag it immediately. It has to look like a weak but deliberate human signature. If she cannot even hold the pen, the board will demand a secondary medical proxy and a massive financial audit. Patricia crossed her arms, sighing heavily. "Then you will just have to use the guy you hired, the professional forger." "It will cost me another $10,000, Jason grumbled, running a hand aggressively through his hair. "But I do not have a choice. I will meet with him tonight and get the documents stamped. Just make sure the hospital staff keeps authorizing the ventilator until Friday night." They packed up the briefcase and turned their backs to me, loudly discussing their expensive dinner plans, as if they had not just attempted to rob a dying woman. I lay there in my silent prison, calculating my exact next move. Jason's greed and impatience were his greatest vulnerabilities. By forcing him to use a back-channel forger, I was ensuring he created a massive, undeniable paper trail of federal wire fraud and corporate theft. But a forged document was not nearly enough to put them all behind bars for good. I needed concrete, undeniable legal evidence linking all three of them to the overarching conspiracy and the tampered brakes. My mind raced analytically, mapping the parameters of my digital footprint. I had an elaborate network of hidden security cameras installed throughout my entire house to watch my dogs while I was at the office. If Jason and Melanie were secretly living there together, they were inevitably talking about their crimes on camera. I desperately needed to access that specific footage. To accomplish that hack from a hospital bed, I needed a smart device and an outside proxy. I needed someone who possessed elite forensic financial skills and who also had a deep personal vendetta against my sister. I needed Terrence. Melanie's African American husband was a brilliant certified public accountant with a fiercely uncompromising moral compass. If I could somehow show him the ugly truth, he would gladly burn their entire criminal operation to the ground. The interlocking pieces of my digital trap were finally falling into place. I just had to survive another night. The hospital ward shifted into its quiet nocturnal rhythm. Brenda slipped into my room, closing the heavy wooden door with a soft click. She pulled a sleek black iPad from beneath her medical scrubs and laid it carefully across my chest. My fingers were still stiff and uncoordinated, but the adrenaline surging through my veins forced them to cooperate. I gave Brenda a single firm nod of gratitude. She drew the privacy curtains tight around my bed and turned off the overhead fluorescent lights, leaving only the green glow of the heart monitor and the bright tablet screen illuminating the darkness. I had precisely 4 hours until the morning shift change. I tapped the screen. My muscles ached with every minor movement, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the psychological drive pushing me forward. Jason thought he was a criminal mastermind. He had predictably changed the primary wireless network passwords and locked me out of the main administrative portal of our home network. He had likely hired the same amateur hacker he planned to use for my corporate accounts to secure the perimeter. But a smart home is just a web of interconnected vulnerabilities, if you know exactly where to look. I bypassed the main router firewall entirely and targeted the secondary communication protocol operating the smart thermostat in the upstairs hallway. Jason had completely forgotten that Internet of Things devices often use default factory firmware ports that are rarely updated. I executed a simple brute force script through a secure proxy interface I had coded years ago for penetration testing. Within 12 agonizing minutes, the thermostat yielded its access token. From that compromised entry point, I piggybacked onto the internal local area network, pivoting directly to the hidden nanny cameras I had installed last winter to keep an eye on my golden retrievers. Jason never knew about those specific cameras because they operated on an invisible radio frequency completely separate from the main home security system. The video feed buffered for a terrifying second before snapping into crystal clear high-definition resolution. The first camera view loaded, showing my primary living room. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. There was Melanie, lounging comfortably on my custom leather sofa wearing my expensive silk bathrobe. She had her bare feet propped up on the mahogany coffee table, sipping red wine from my absolute favorite crystal glass. A moment later, Jason walked into the digital frame carrying 2 large black trash bags. I watched in absolute disgust as my husband began violently shoving my framed family photographs, my favorite books, and my personal keepsakes into the garbage. They were casually erasing my entire existence while I was still drawing breath in an intensive care unit. I tapped the screen to activate the live audio feed. The sound of clinking glass and their casual, horrific conversation filled my silent hospital room. Jason threw a silver-framed picture of me into the trash bag and let out a deeply frustrated sigh. "I cannot believe we have to wait until Friday for the medical proxy to clear," Jason complained loudly, pacing aggressively across the expensive living room rug. If I had known the brake line cut was going to leave her in a coma instead of finishing the job on the highway, I would have paid that mechanic double to sever the steering column entirely. Melanie took a long sip of her wine and laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made my skin crawl and my blood run freezing cold. "Just be patient," Melanie told him, rolling her eyes. "You paid the guy in anonymous cryptocurrency, so there is zero paper trail connecting you to the tampered brakes. Once the hospital pulls the plug, we sell this massive house and move to the islands. Nobody is ever going to suspect a single thing." They had just handed me their murder confession on a silver platter. I immediately initiated a secure file transfer protocol. I routed the video and audio files through 3 separate offshore virtual private networks, wiping any conceivable trace of my hospital internet protocol address. I dumped the massive data payload directly into my encrypted cloud drive. The progress bar crept across the screen, agonizingly slow. I kept one anxious eye on the hospital room door and the other on the downloading files. Every ticking second felt like an absolute eternity. The fear of being discovered by a random doctor performing rounds made my chest tight. Finally, the tablet screen flashed a bright green confirmation checkmark. The damning evidence was permanently locked behind an impenetrable cryptographic wall. I deleted my access history, cleared the tablet cache, and handed the device back to Brenda. My physical body was completely exhausted, sinking heavily into the firm hospital mattress, but my mind was sharp, victorious, and buzzing with lethal clarity. Jason and Melanie had just provided the exact ammunition I needed to completely destroy their lives. They felt untouchable in my home, drinking my wine and plotting the end of my life. They failed to realize they had just recorded their own prison sentences. Now I had to deliver that loaded digital weapon to the one man who could properly pull the trigger without raising any immediate suspicion from my family. I needed someone with an analytical mind who would not let unchecked emotion ruin the timeline of my revenge. I needed to bring Terrence into the fold. My brother-in-law was a man defined by logic and strict rules, and discovering his wife conspiring to commit murder while engaging in a filthy affair would ignite a calculated wrath they could never anticipate. I closed my eyes and allowed my breathing to match the steady mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. The first phase of my counterstrike was a complete success. Tomorrow, the real psychological warfare would finally begin. I would securely lock my assets, dismantle their fraudulent schemes, and ensure they faced the harshest penalties under the American legal system. The dawn light crept through the hospital blinds, casting long gray shadows across my sterile room. I had the evidence I needed to put Jason and Melanie away for decades, but raw data was completely useless if it just sat on an encrypted cloud server. I was physically confined to this mechanical bed. I could not walk into a federal field office. I could not march into a corporate boardroom to freeze my assets. I needed a proxy on the outside. I needed a proxy who possessed the specific forensic financial skills to track Jason's complex web of debt and wire fraud. Most importantly, I needed someone who possessed an absolute, uncompromising moral compass and a deeply personal reason to watch my sister burn. Terrence was the only logical choice. He was a brilliant certified public accountant at one of the top financial firms in Chicago. An African-American man who had built his entire reputation on flawless integrity and rigorous compliance. Terrence was a rule follower to his core. He believed in order, logic, and absolute transparency. When he married Melanie, I had honestly been baffled. He was solid and dependable while she was chaotic and relentlessly selfish. But Melanie was an expert manipulator, playing the role of the sweet, supportive wife whenever Terrence was in the room. He had absolutely no idea that the woman he shared a home with was currently sleeping with his brother-in-law and actively plotting a murder. I knew that presenting Terrence with this truth would break his heart. But I also knew that once the initial shock subsided, his analytical accounting mind would take over. He would not just get angry, he would get even. He would dissect their financial lives with surgical precision and hand the authorities an airtight case. But I could not simply call him. The hospital phone lines were monitored, and Jason was constantly checking the visitor logs. I needed to establish an invisible, untraceable line of communication. When Brenda returned for her next night shift, I asked for the tablet again. My hands were slightly steadier tonight, the muscle memory slowly fighting its way through the residual paralysis. I needed to create a burner number that could never be traced back to the hospital internet protocol address or my personal cellular accounts. I opened a secure browser routing my connection through 3 separate virtual private networks located in Switzerland, Iceland, and Singapore. I accessed an anonymous voice-over internet protocol service, paying for the temporary digits using a fraction of the cryptocurrency I had moved earlier. Creating the message was a delicate psychological operation. If I sent too much information at once, Terrence might think it was a scam or a malicious phishing attempt. Accounting professionals were naturally skeptical and highly trained to ignore unsolicited links. I had to make the message cryptic enough to bypass his spam filters, but personal enough that he could not ignore it. I needed to guide him to a secure drop point, to view the initial evidence of the affair without alerting him to my survival just yet. I navigated to a dark web file hosting service that utilized zero-knowledge encryption. It meant that once I uploaded a file and generated a link, even the host server could not see what the data contained. I took a 30-second clip from the nanny camera footage. It was a clear, undeniable angle of Melanie and Jason kissing on my living room sofa, passionately tearing at each other's clothes. It did not contain the audio about the brake tampering. I needed to ease Terrence into the betrayal before I dropped the attempted murder charges on him. I uploaded the short video clip and generated the secure link. Then I set an expiration timer on the drop point. The file would completely self-destruct 24 hours after the initial access. I opened the burner texting application and stared at the blank message field. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard. I typed carefully. Terrence, you pride yourself on balancing the books and finding the hidden discrepancies. You are missing a massive deficit in your own home. Do not call this number. Do not tell your wife. Go to a secure computer not connected to your firm network. Type this exact link into the browser. The password is the date of your wedding anniversary backwards. See the truth for yourself. I pasted the encrypted link at the bottom of the text. Using his anniversary as the decryption key was a calculated emotional strike. It proved the sender knew intimate details about his life, and it would twist the knife just enough to force his hand. I hit send. The application confirmed the message was delivered. I lay back against the pillows, my chest tight with anticipation. I had a tracking script attached to the destination server. I would know exactly when the file was opened and from what general geographic location. I watched the tablet screen, the green numbers reflecting in my eyes. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Terrence was a meticulous man. He was likely reviewing the message, analyzing the syntax, and weighing the cybersecurity risks of opening an unknown link. He would probably isolate a sandbox environment on a separate device to ensure the link did not contain malware. I respected his caution. It was exactly why I needed him on my side. At precisely 2:14 in the morning, the tracking script flashed yellow. A secure ping registered from an internet service provider located in the downtown Chicago area. It was not his home network. He had likely gone to a 24-hour coffee shop or used a separate cellular hotspot to access the drop point. The decryption key was entered successfully. The file began to buffer. I stared at the screen, visualizing the exact moment Terrence's world shattered. I imagined him sitting in the glow of a laptop screen, watching his beautiful, smiling wife lock lips with his brother-in-law. I knew the exact shade of betrayal washing over him because I was drowning in the exact same ocean. The tracking script indicated the video file played completely through. Then it played a second time, and a third. He was watching it on a loop, absorbing the undeniable visual proof. The data log showed him downloading the encrypted file directly to his local drive before the server automatically purged the original copy. The drop point was now a ghost. I closed the tracking portal and deleted the burner application from the tablet entirely. I handed the device back to Brenda, who quickly tucked it away out of sight. The message was delivered. The seed was planted. Terrence was a man of action, and I knew he would not rest until he uncovered the identity of the anonymous sender. He would start digging into Jason's life, and the moment he did, he would realize the massive financial black hole my husband was desperately trying to hide. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a long, steady breath. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming, but my spirit was burning brighter than ever. I had officially deployed my proxy into the battlefield. Terrence was now awake to the nightmare. It was only a matter of time before he came looking for answers, and when he finally found his way to my hospital room, I would be ready to hand him the matches to burn their entire world to ash. The next afternoon, my room door opened slowly. I kept my eyes fixed. The footsteps crossing the threshold were measured. My peripheral vision caught the visitor. It was Terrence. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, but his posture betrayed exhaustion. He stood at my bed, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. He checked the room corners for hidden cameras. Jason and Patricia had gone to the cafeteria, leaving me unattended. This was my only window. I took a stabilizing breath and allowed my facial muscles to tighten back into a natural expression. I closed my eyes, clearing the stare, and looked directly at him. "Terrence," I whispered. My voice was raspy but clear. He recoiled, taking a step backward. His eyes widened in shock and his mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the monitor, then back at me, deciding if this was a hallucination. "Close the door," I instructed, keeping my voice low. "Lock it." Terrence operated on instinct, moving swiftly to engage the deadbolt before rushing back. "You are awake," he breathed, his voice trembling with awe. "Jason told everyone you were gone." "Jason is a liar," I replied, "about my condition, about his finances, and about your wife." Terrence swallowed hard. The mention of Melanie made his shoulders stiffen. He pulled out his encrypted smartphone. "I received a secured message last night," he said, shifting from stunned relative to an interrogating auditor. "It contained a video of my wife and your husband. I spent all night analyzing the metadata, trying to prove it was a deepfake or a smear campaign. Tell me you did not send it, Alyssa. Tell me this is an extortion plot." "I am sorry, Terrence," I said, feeling a pang of grief. "I truly sent it. I bypassed the home network security from this bed using an anonymous proxy. I only sent a fraction of the truth. You really need to see the rest." I reached under my blankets and pulled out the iPad Brenda had left hidden against my side. I unlocked the screen and opened the encrypted drive, handing the tablet to Terrence. He took it with his shaking hands. "Press play," I commanded. Terrence tapped the screen. The high-definition footage of my living room filled the bright display. He watched the agonizing scene all over again. He saw Jason and Melanie kissing on my sofa. He saw them throwing away my personal belongings like garbage. I watched Terrence's face crumble. The stoic, uncompromising professional broke down. A single tear escaped his eye, tracing a line down his cheek as the reality of his ruined marriage finally set in. Then the audio kicked in. The speakers were muted low, but the voices of our spouses were unmistakable. Jason's voice filtered through the tablet, complaining about my checking account balance. Then came the ultimate confession. He admitted to cutting my brake lines for $50,000. He admitted to plotting my murder with Melanie's full support. Terrence stopped breathing. The sorrow on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a chilling, paralyzing horror. He rewound the video and listened to the audio a second time, then a third time. He was processing their depravity. They were not just adulterers, they were conspirators in a calculated assassination attempt. Terrence slowly lowered the tablet and placed it on my bed. When he looked up at me, the heartbroken husband was completely gone. In his place stood a relentless forensic accountant who had just discovered a massive, fatal discrepancy in the ledger. "They are trying to kill you," he stated, dropping his voice to an icy whisper. "They put you in this bed to steal your company and liquidate your assets. They need me alive until Friday," I explained quickly, outlining the ticking clock. "Jason is hiring a black market forger to fake my signature on the corporate equity transfers tomorrow. Once he secures majority status, he and Patricia will authorize pulling my ventilator. They think I am a vegetable. They have no idea I am fully conscious and monitoring every single move they make." Terrence placed his hands flat on the edge of my bed. His mind was already miles ahead, compartmentalizing the trauma and organizing a tactical response. "A forged corporate transfer leaves a massive digital footprint," he said, narrowing his eyes. "If he attempts to execute a hostile takeover using fraudulent signatures, he will have to move the assets through a series of shell companies to avoid triggering federal oversight. I can track that. I can map every single transaction, every wire transfer, and every offshore routing number he uses. I do not just want to survive this, Terrence," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I want to obliterate them. I want them to lose every penny they steal. I want them humiliated in front of the entire city. And then I want them to rot in a federal penitentiary for the rest of their natural lives. But I cannot do it from this bed. I need an inside man. I need you to build a dossier for the Federal Bureau of Investigation that is so mathematically airtight, no defense attorney on earth can tear it apart. Terrence did not hesitate. He buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his tie. They thought they could treat us like disposable collateral, he said, his voice vibrating with a cold, righteous fury. They thought they could commit murder and walk away rich. I am going to freeze every account they touch. I am going to audit their entire existence. By the time I am finished with them, they will not have enough money to buy a cup of coffee. We have an alliance, then? I asked, extending my right hand. It was weak and trembling, but functional. Terrence reached out and gripped my hand firmly, sealing our pact. We are going to bury them, Alyssa. Now tell me exactly what Jason is planning to make you sign. He plans to bring a notary tomorrow morning, I told Terrence, keeping my voice at a steady whisper. He needs me to sign a document that gives him a comprehensive power of attorney over my domestic assets. He believes that because I am severely cognitively impaired, he can guide my hand and force a signature that the hospital staff will accept. If he succeeds, he gains total access to everything I own before the weekend. Terrence leaned back in the sterile hospital chair, absorbing the timeline. He tapped his index finger against his knee, a habit he always displayed when calculating risk. A forced signature on a power of attorney, while the patient is medically documented as incapacitated, is already a felony. He stated, his accounting mind working rapidly. But if he uses that forged document to transfer funds across state lines or access federally insured banking institutions, he crosses directly into federal wire fraud. We do not just want to stop him, Alyssa. We want to let him commit the crime entirely. We need him to sign his own digital confession. I nodded, understanding the brilliance of the strategy. If I fought him tomorrow, he might panic and find another way to kill me. But if I gave him exactly what he wanted, he would feel invincible. He would rush to move the money, creating an undeniable paper trail. Friday morning broke with a heavy rain lashing against my hospital window. The gloomy weather perfectly mirrored the tension thick in the room. I was back in my paralyzed shell, staring blankly at the acoustic ceiling tiles. The heart monitor beeped in its monotonous rhythm. Terrence arrived early, taking a seat in the corner. He played his part flawlessly, acting the role of the deeply concerned and supportive brother-in-law. He held a cup of black coffee, looking exhausted and defeated. Right at 9 o'clock, the heavy wooden door swung open. Jason strutted into the room wearing a sharp navy suit, looking entirely too polished for a grieving husband. Behind him trailed a nervous-looking man carrying a leather briefcase. The man had slicked back hair and a cheap watch. This was the notary, a corrupt associate Jason had likely bribed to look the other way while committing corporate theft. Jason stopped short when he saw Terrence sitting in the corner. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Terrence, what are you doing here so early?" Jason asked, attempting to sound warmly surprised. "Melanie had an early meeting," Terrence replied, his voice smooth and convincing. "I wanted to check on Alyssa before heading into the firm. The doctor said there was no change, but I just wanted to sit with her for a while. It breaks my heart seeing her like this." Jason relaxed visibly, buying the performance completely. "It is devastating." Jason agreed, moving to the side of my bed and placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I barely slept last night. But the hospital administration is breathing down my neck regarding the insurance coverage. They need her signature on a medical billing release form today, or they threaten to move her to a lower-tier care facility. I brought Greg from my office to notarize the paperwork so we can keep her in this private room." Greg, the corrupt notary, offered a stiff nod to Terrence. "Just routine administrative compliance," Greg muttered, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Terrence stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "Do you need me to step outside, Jason?" he asked, offering the perfect opening. "No, please stay," Jason insisted, eager to project total transparency. "This will only take a minute. It is just a nightmare having to deal with bureaucracy while my wife is fighting for her life." Jason reached into Greg's leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I caught a fleeting glimpse of the bold heading printed across the top page. It did not say medical billing release. It read, durable power of attorney and full asset delegation. He was handing himself the absolute keys to my entire kingdom. Jason moved close to my bed, blocking Terrence's direct line of sight to the paperwork. He unclasped a heavy metal fountain pen. I kept my jaw slack and my eyes unfocused, acting like a hollow vessel devoid of any comprehension. Jason grabbed my right forearm. His grip was completely unforgiving, digging painfully into my skin as he lifted my limp hand. "Come on, sweetheart," Jason whispered, his breath hot against my cheek. "I know you are in there somewhere. Just hold the pen for me. Let us get this medical paperwork sorted out so you can rest." He forced the thick barrel of the pen between my thumb and index finger. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. This was the critical moment. If I signed too perfectly, the corporate lawyers would instantly flag the signature as fraudulent, given my documented medical state. If I dropped the pen again, Jason might resort to more desperate, violent measures. I needed to execute a signature that looked exactly like a dying woman being physically manipulated by a greedy husband. I let my peripheral vision drift toward the corner of the room. Terrence was watching the interaction intensely. For a brief, invisible second, Terrence caught my gaze. He gave me a microscopic nod. It was the signal. The trap was ready to snap shut. I allowed a slight tremor to travel down my arm. I tightened my grip on the pen just enough to keep it from falling onto the blanket. Jason sensed the microscopic resistance and smiled a cold, victorious smirk. He placed his large hand firmly over mine, wrapping his fingers tightly around my knuckles. He dragged my hand toward the bottom of the page. I fought him internally, creating a jagged, irregular drag on the paper. The ink scratched across the dotted line in a chaotic, shaky scrawl. It looked absolutely nothing like my sharp professional signature. It looked exactly like coercion. It was a beautiful disaster. "Perfect," Jason breathed, pulling the paper away quickly. He handed the document to Greg. "Stamp it." Greg took the paperwork without bothering to verify my identity or check my cognitive state. He pulled a heavy metal stamp from his briefcase and pressed it firmly onto the bottom of the page. The loud clack of the notary stamp echoed in the silent hospital room, sealing Jason's fate forever. "Thank you, Greg," Jason said, slipping the documents back into the briefcase. "You are a lifesaver. I will walk you out." Jason turned to Terrence, offering a somber nod. "I am going to run these down to the billing department and then head to the office to sort out some coverage issues. Will you be all right here for a bit, Terrence?" "Take your time, Jason," Terrence replied, his voice layered with a dark, hidden meaning. "I am exactly where I need to be." Jason and his corrupt associate walked out of the room, completely oblivious to the reality of what had just transpired. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Terrence and me alone. I slowly turned my head toward Terrence, letting the blank stare fade from my eyes. A cold, hard clarity replaced the amnesia act. Terrence walked over to the side of my bed, his eyes burning with a fierce, calculating intensity. He pulled his encrypted phone from his pocket and immediately began typing. "He just triggered the tripwire," Terrence stated, his voice low and dangerous. "The moment he submits that notarized document to any financial institution, he commits federal wire fraud. The notary is an accessory to forgery. I am pinging my contacts at the Federal Regulatory Commission right now. We are going to let him initiate the asset transfers. We are going to watch him drain his own grave." I flexed my right hand, the muscles aching from the forced manipulation. "Let him buy the luxury cars, Terrence," I whispered, my voice gaining absolute strength. "Let him pay off his gambling debts with my money. The deeper he digs, the harder the federal agents will drop the ultimate hammer." Terrence locked his phone and looked at me. "The trap is completely set, Alyssa. Now we will drain him dry." The moment Terrence left the hospital room, Jason wasted absolutely no time executing his fraudulent takeover. By Tuesday afternoon, Jason marched right into the main branch of my primary financial institution downtown. He walked up to the executive desk wearing his custom-tailored suit and slapped the forged, durable power of attorney. Down on the mahogany surface, Terrence had already placed a silent digital monitor on all my domestic accounts through his firm's secure back-end. We watched the alerts roll in real time. Jason legally declared me entirely incapacitated and completely stripped my financial autonomy with a single piece of stamped paper. The bank manager, failing to verify the medical context, authorized immediate administrative access to my entire domestic portfolio. Jason transferred $300,000 directly into a newly formed limited liability company within 20 minutes. His next move was even more brazen. Jason needed massive liquid capital to clear his gambling debts before his creditors lost their patience. He leveraged my pristine credit score and the forged power of attorney to apply for a fraudulent second mortgage on our primary residence. He authorized a home equity line of credit for $800,000. He pushed the paperwork through an online lending institution that prioritized speed over rigorous compliance. Terrence sat in his corner office downtown, staring at his multiple glowing monitors with a cold, predatory focus. His fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, capturing every keystroke, every digital signature, and every internet protocol address Jason generated during the loan application process. Terrence logged the exact timestamp of the fraudulent mortgage approval, ensuring the federal prosecutors would have concrete proof of premeditated financial exploitation. Once the mortgage funds cleared, Jason immediately began washing the money. He wired $500,000 to a series of offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He thought he was being an untraceable criminal mastermind, but Terrence easily unspooled the encrypted routing numbers, exposing the direct payments to illegal underground sportsbooks. Jason was literally paying off his mob debts using stolen equity from his dying wife's house. The arrogance did not stop there, with his life no longer in danger from loan sharks. Jason decided to reward himself. He walked into a high-end European auto dealership and purchased a brand-new customized sports car. He paid $140,000 in pure cash. Transferring the funds directly from my drained savings account, Terrence documented the vehicle identification number and the exact wire transfer receipt, carefully sliding the evidence into a thick red folder marked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Melanie was equally intoxicated by the sudden influx of stolen wealth. Assuming I would be dead by Friday, she saw absolutely no reason to hide her greed. She transferred $50,000 straight into her personal checking account, labeling it as a medical hardship reimbursement. She spent the entire afternoon walking down the most expensive shopping districts in Chicago, buying designer handbags, diamond jewelry, and couture dresses. Terrence watched his own wife's bank statements light up with exorbitant purchases. Every notification of a luxury transaction was a fresh twist of the knife, but the betrayal only hardened his resolve, turning his broken heart into a weapon of absolute justice. He tracked her retail footprint block by block, building a chronological map of her massive spending spree, ensuring she could never deny her malicious involvement. Patricia was not going to be left out of the plunder. My mother logged onto a luxury travel website and booked an elite first-class vacation to the French Riviera for her and Melanie. She spent $25,000 on premium flights and five-star resort suites, deliberately scheduling the departure for 2 weeks after my planned execution. She wanted to mourn my tragic passing while sipping expensive champagne on a private balcony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. She used my primary credit card to fund the entire excursion, carelessly tying her name directly to the fraudulent spending. She then finalized plans to sell off my valuable cybersecurity software equipment to the highest bidder, believing she controlled my entire professional legacy. Every single transaction was another nail in their collective coffin. Terrence did not intervene or attempt to freeze the accounts prematurely. He let them gorge themselves on the stolen funds, capturing their unfettered gluttony. He meticulously compiled a flawless, impenetrable dossier. He cross-referenced the forged power of attorney with the exact geolocation data of Jason's mobile device, proving Jason was physically executing these fraudulent wires from his phone. Terrence matched the internet protocol addresses from the bank logins directly to the router inside my home, confirming Jason and Melanie were initiating the massive financial transfers together in the living room they had completely taken over. Terrence operated with the precision of a seasoned federal auditor, mapping the entire conspiracy on a massive digital whiteboard. He traced the money laundering structure, showing exactly how Jason tried to hide the stolen funds behind fake corporate entities. He printed every bank statement, every loan origination document, and every digital receipt, organizing them into perfectly labeled exhibits. By Thursday evening, Terrence had built a staggering mountain of evidence, detailing federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The financial drain they subjected me to was completely horrifying to witness. But it was the exact rope they needed to hang themselves. They were utterly blinded by their own greed, emptying my domestic accounts with reckless abandon. They had absolutely no idea that a master accountant was monitoring their every move, translating their profound arrogance into a guaranteed federal prison sentence. Their temporary wealth was nothing but an illusion waiting to shatter into a million different pieces. The paper trail proved extreme, premeditated fraud, and Terrence ensured that not a single cent of their extravagant purchases could ever be legally justified. They were spending their way right into a small concrete cell, with zero chance of escaping the heavy financial hammer waiting for them tomorrow. The high of their initial spending spree didn't last long. By Friday morning, Jason's manic energy had shifted back into a paranoid frenzy. I watched him pace the length of my hospital room while Patricia and Melanie were out running errands. He was muttering to himself, scrolling furiously on his phone. The $50,000 he'd drained from my checking account, combined with the initial draw from the fraudulent mortgage, had satisfied his immediate most dangerous creditors. But it wasn't enough. Jason was a man addicted to the thrill of the gamble, and his debts were a hydra. Cut off one head and two more appeared. He needed the big score. He needed the company assets he believed were locked away in my corporate accounts. He stopped at the foot of my bed, glaring down at me. "Where is it, Alyssa?" he whispered, his voice vibrating with a toxic mix of frustration and greed. "I know you didn't build a multi-million-dollar company just to leave 50 grand in a checking account. You hid it. You always were too smart for your own good." He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. "I'm going to find it. I hired someone. Someone who doesn't care about your fancy firewalls. By tonight, I'll have every digital cent you own, and then we're finally going to pull that plug." He turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving me alone with the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. He had hired a hacker. I felt a surge of cold, analytical adrenaline. Jason was bringing a street brawler to a digital chess match. He had absolutely no idea that he was stepping into my arena. As soon as Brenda started her night shift, I gave her the signal. She slipped the iPad onto my chest, drawing the privacy curtains tight. My fingers, though still weak, moved with practiced precision across the glass screen. I had anticipated this exact move. Jason was desperate, and desperate men make sloppy digital choices. I routed my connection through the secure proxies I had established, tunneling my way into the back-end architecture of my own cybersecurity firm. I wasn't going to build a wall to keep his hacker out. I was going to build a door and invite him right in. In the cybersecurity world, this is called a honeypot, a decoy server designed to look like a high-value target intended to lure attackers in, so you can monitor their methods and trace their origin. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously constructing the trap. I created a shadow directory within the firm's secondary servers, labeling it with irresistible bait, executive escrow assets, and offshore routing directives. I seeded the directory with hundreds of fabricated financial documents, fake ledgers, dummy account numbers, and simulated wire transfer logs that looked incredibly authentic. It was a digital mirage designed to make Jason's hacker think he had just cracked the vault. But the documents were not just fake, they were weaponized. I embedded a highly sophisticated tracking Trojan within the metadata of the PDF files. It was a dormant payload, completely undetectable to standard antivirus scans. The moment the hacker downloaded the files to their local machine and opened them, the Trojan would execute. It wouldn't destroy their system. It would silently hijack their administrative privileges, granting me unrestricted stealth access to their entire network. I finalized the code setting the trap on a hair trigger. Then I opened a hidden command terminal and waited. The digital silence was absolute. I watched the server logs, the green text scrolling steadily across the black screen. At 2:14 a.m., the perimeter alarm tripped. A series of aggressive brute force attacks began hammering against the outer firewall of the decoy server. It was a crude methodology, loud and clumsy, confirming my suspicion that Jason had hired a low-level black market operative rather than a true professional. The hacker was using a known vulnerability exploit, a script kiddie technique that my actual corporate defenses would have swatted away in a microsecond. But this was the honeypot. I manually lowered the defensive thresholds, allowing the attacker to bypass the initial security layers. The log files lit up with activity as the hacker gained access to the decoy directory. I could almost feel their arrogant satisfaction radiating through the screen. They thought they had bested the great Alyssa's security protocols. I watched, holding my breath, as the hacker initiated the file transfer sequence. They were downloading the weaponized PDFs, eagerly pulling the bait into their own system. The progress bar in my terminal tracked the data flow: 50%, 75%, 100%. The transfer was complete. The hacker immediately disconnected, attempting to vanish back into the dark web. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen. The trap was sprung, but the payload required a human trigger. I needed the hacker or Jason himself to open one of those files. 10 excruciating minutes passed. My heart hammered against my ribs, competing with the steady beep of the monitor. If they suspected the files were corrupted, if they ran a deep-level forensic scan before opening them, the Trojan might be neutralized. Suddenly, a new line of code populated my command terminal. Payload executed. Connection established. They had opened the files. My fingers flew across the iPad screen, initiating the remote access protocol. The Trojan had successfully bypassed the hacker's local security, creating a secure, invisible tunnel directly from my hospital bed to their machine. I was in. I bypassed the hacker's interface entirely, diving straight into their network routing tables. I needed to identify the point of origin. The hacker was using a chain of VPNs trying to mask their location, but the Trojan gave me access to their root directory. I traced the connection back through the proxies, peeling away the layers of digital anonymity. The IP address resolved. It wasn't an offshore server farm or a sophisticated dark web hub. It was a local residential address right here in Chicago. I cross-referenced the IP with the physical location data. A cold smile spread across my face, though my facial muscles barely twitched. The hacker wasn't operating from a basement bunker. They were operating directly from my own living room. Jason hadn't just hired a hacker. He had brought them into my house. He was sitting there right now watching those fake financial documents open, completely unaware that he had just handed me the master key to his entire digital life. The silent war had shifted. I wasn't just defending my assets anymore. I was inside their network, and I was about to tear their secrets wide open. The first step was lateral movement. The hacker had foolishly connected their rig to my primary home wireless network, rather than establishing a completely isolated subnet. Through the remote terminal on my iPad, I deployed a silent network scanner. Within seconds, a list of connected devices populated my screen. I bypassed the smart televisions and the wireless speakers, focusing my attention entirely on the two primary communication devices actively transmitting data. One was a high-end smartphone registered to Jason. The other was his personal laptop. My Trojan payload was designed with a highly aggressive worm propagation protocol. I executed the command and watched as the malicious code quietly replicated itself, bridging the gap between the hacker's infected machine and Jason's personal hardware without triggering any system alarms. Jason always mocked my obsession with digital security, claiming my two-factor authentication rules were a waste of time. His arrogance was now his absolute undoing. He used the exact same uninspired password for his local administrator account that he used for his streaming services. I bypassed his lock screen in less than 30 seconds. Suddenly, I was staring at a perfect mirrored display of his laptop screen right from my hospital bed. I initiated a background data cloning process, pulling his entire hard drive contents into my encrypted cloud vault. I did not just want to look at his files. I needed permanent, unalterable copies for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I opened his web browser history first. Jason had always maintained the facade of a polished corporate salesman, but his digital footprint painted a portrait of severe addiction. I found bookmark after bookmark, pointing to offshore sportsbooks and unregulated cryptocurrency casinos. But the standard gambling sites were just the surface layer. I ran a deep forensic scan on his application directory and found a hidden partitioned drive containing a Tor browser. Jason was actively operating on the dark web. I extracted the decryption keys from his saved keychain and accessed his hidden communications portal. The messages I uncovered were absolutely chilling. I scrolled through encrypted chat logs, reading conversations that made my blood run freezing cold. Jason was not just placing casual bets on football games. He was leveraging massive amounts of capital on high-stakes underground gambling syndicates. I pulled up an active ledger file he kept hidden under a disguised spreadsheet. The numbers were staggering. Jason owed money to people who did not send collection letters. He owed money to people who broke legs and sent terrifying threats. I tallied the negative balances across 5 different illicit accounts. The final sum sat at $840,000. My heart hammered against my ribs as the true reality of my situation finally crystallized. Jason did not just want to kill me so he could run off to the islands with my sister. He needed to kill me because his own life was actively on the line. He was a desperate, trapped animal. The loan sharks were closing in on him, and my life insurance policy, alongside my corporate equity, was his only ticket out of a shallow grave. The $50,000 he had drained from my checking account earlier this week was likely just a temporary tribute payment to keep the enforcers away from his front door. He desperately needed the millions locked in my company to buy his survival. I kept digging my fingers flying across the glass screen with relentless precision. If he owed that kind of money, he had to have a documented paper trail for the brake tampering. Desperate criminals always leave receipts. I ran a targeted keyword search across his entire encrypted message history, filtering for terms like mechanic, brakes, and car. The search algorithm churned for an agonizing minute before highlighting a specific conversation thread from 3 weeks ago. The chat was with an anonymous user operating under a numeric handle. I opened the log and read the exchange. Jason had sent a detailed schedule of my daily commute, including the exact time I left the office and the precise route I took down the steep interstate highway. The anonymous user replied with a price. $50,000 paid in untraceable cryptocurrency up front. Jason agreed. I checked the transaction history on his hidden digital wallet and found the exact transfer. He had routed the payment through a digital coin tumbler to mask the destination, but he had stupidly taken a screenshot of the confirmation page and saved it to his local photos folder. Then I found the text message that sealed his fate. It was sent to Melanie just hours after he transferred the cryptocurrency to the mechanic. The message read, "The down payment is clear. The guy guarantees the brake line will snap under heavy pressure. We just have to act normal until the police call us about the accident." I stared at those horrifying words until they burned into my retinas. My own husband and my own sister casually discussing my violent death over a simple text message. They had planned it, executed it, and celebrated it. I downloaded the chat logs, the cryptocurrency transaction receipts, and the dark web ledgers directly to the secure dossier Terrence was building. I sent a single encrypted ping to Terrence alerting him that the payload was successfully delivered. I knew he was sitting in his office waiting for my signal. I could only imagine his reaction when he opened those files and saw the undeniable written proof of his wife orchestrating a murder-for-hire plot. My physical body was completely exhausted, the mental strain of the hack draining my limited reserves. But the adrenaline surging through my veins kept me wide awake. I had handed Terrence the murder weapon with Jason's and Melanie's fingerprints all over it. The wire fraud charges from the morning were enough to send them to prison, but this evidence elevated the case to conspiracy to commit murder. They were never going to see the outside of a federal penitentiary. I carefully closed the remote connection, ensuring I left absolutely no digital trace of my intrusion on Jason's laptop. I severed the tunnel to the hacker's machine, leaving the honeypot active just in case they tried to download more fake files. I cleared my tablet's cache and handed the device back to Brenda. She took it with a knowing nod, tucking it safely away out of sight. I closed my eyes and sank back into the sterile hospital mattress. The ticking clock hanging over my head felt entirely different now. Jason still believed he had to finalize the corporate theft by Friday to save his own life from the loan sharks. He was going to walk into my hospital room tomorrow completely desperate and aggressively arrogant. He thought I was his helpless victim. He had no idea that I was the apex predator and I was holding the tight leash that would drag him straight into a concrete cell. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy gray clouds gathering outside my hospital window. Brenda finished her shift just before 7, but not before slipping the iPad under the thick fold of my thermal blanket. I had requested she leave the audio recording application actively running. I knew my mother was scheduled to visit this morning, and Patricia never missed an opportunity to perform her tragic maternal role for the daytime medical staff. But today I anticipated she would eventually be left alone with me. Jason was frantically dealing with his loan sharks, and Melanie was likely nursing a hangover from her shopping spree. When the heavy wooden door finally clicked open, my heart maintained its slow, steady rhythm. I kept my eyes fixed on a meaningless spot on the opposite wall. The sharp, aggressive clack of heels announced Patricia. She walked in alone. No doctors trailed behind her today. She did not bother to put on the grieving mother act. She tossed her expensive leather handbag onto the visitor chair and walked straight to the side of my bed. I let my jaw hang slightly slack, maintaining the perfect illusion of a vacant mind. Patricia stared down at me with an expression of profound clinical disgust. She did not offer a gentle touch or a comforting word. Instead, her eyes darted immediately to my left hand resting limp on top of the white sheets. My platinum wedding ring caught the fluorescent overhead light. The center diamond was a flawless 3-carat stone I had purchased for myself disguised as a gift from Jason to protect his fragile ego. Patricia reached out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was completely devoid of warmth. It was the calculated touch of a scavenger picking over a carcass. She dug her sharp acrylic nails into my knuckles, pinning my hand down against the mattress. Then she grabbed the diamond ring. My fingers were slightly swollen from the intravenous fluids, making the metal band tight against my skin. Patricia did not care. She yanked the ring upward, dragging the hard metal violently over my knuckle. The sheer physical pain shot up my arm, but I forced my facial muscles to remain entirely, completely dead. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I lay there like a mannequin while my own mother robbed me blind. "This is completely wasted on you now, Alyssa," Patricia muttered forcefully, twisting the ring until it finally broke free from my finger. She held the diamond up to the light, examining it with naked greed. "Melanie has always wanted a stone this size. Jason is going to need every liquid asset he can find to secure the new house. You certainly do not need this where you are going." She dropped the priceless ring directly into her designer purse, zipping it shut with a loud, definitive snap. I cataloged the theft, committing the exact timestamp to memory. The iPad hidden beneath my blankets was capturing every single syllable of her horrifying monologue. Patricia leaned in closer. Her floral perfume was cloying and suffocating. She rested her hands on the metal bedrail, staring directly into my unblinking eyes. "You always thought you were so much better than us," Patricia whispered, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous pitch. "You and your cybersecurity company. You and your endless ambition. You looked down on Melanie because she needed help. You looked down on me because I asked you to support your family. You wanted to be the smart, independent one who did not need anybody. Well, look exactly where that fierce independence got you. You are a pathetic, drooling burden." She traced a finger mockingly along the edge of my cheek. I had to focus entirely on my breathing to prevent my jaw from snapping shut. "Jason is signing the final corporate equity transfers this afternoon." Patricia continued, laying out the final phases of their timeline. As soon as the ink dries on those documents, we are authorizing the hospital to pull your ventilator. But if by some terrible miracle you actually keep breathing on your own, we have a backup plan. I found a state-funded nursing home on the absolute worst side of the city. It is a miserable rundown facility for wards of the state. It smells like urine and despair. That is where you are going, Alyssa. I am going to dump you in a shared room with zero private funding and leave you to rot. I am going to make sure the nurses know you have no family visiting. You will lie in a soiled bed until your body finally gives out. The sheer malice in her voice was staggering. This was not just a crime of opportunity or financial greed. This was deeply personal. My mother possessed a pathological hatred for me simply because I had refused to be a pawn in her manipulative games. I had outshined her golden child, and for that crime, I was condemned to a slow, agonizing demise. I never loved you, Alyssa, Patricia confessed casually, adjusting the collar of her expensive silk blouse. You were always too difficult, too observant. Melanie is obedient and beautiful. She deserves the life you hoarded for yourself. Tomorrow night, we are going to open a bottle of vintage champagne in your house and celebrate the fact that we never have to look at your arrogant face again. Patricia checked her reflection in the small mirror above the sink, wiping a smudge of lipstick from the corner of her mouth. She smoothed her hair, picked up her purse containing my stolen wedding ring, and walked toward the exit. She did not look back. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, sealing me once again in the quiet hum of the intensive care unit. I waited exactly 5 minutes to ensure the corridor was completely clear. Then I shifted my hand beneath the thermal blanket. My fingers found the cool glass edge of the iPad. I tapped the screen and halted the audio recording application. I saved the audio file, labeling it with a highly specific alphanumeric tag. I opened the secure tunnel to the encrypted cloud drive and uploaded the flawless audio file directly to Terrence's designated folder. The upload progress bar filled instantly. My mother had just delivered the final devastating piece of evidence. I had Jason's digital footprint proving his massive illegal gambling debts and his explicit text messages paying a mechanic to sever my brake lines. I had Melanie on video living in my home and eagerly discussing my murder. Now I had Patricia on a crystal-clear audio recording, physically robbing a paralyzed patient, detailing a conspiracy to commit medical fraud, and explicitly outlining a plan for elder abuse and malicious neglect. Terrence had the entire puzzle. He had the financial motive, the digital receipts, the video confessions, and the audio proof. The Federal Bureau of Investigation would not just open an inquiry. They would launch a coordinated tactical strike. My family thought they had successfully orchestrated the perfect crime. They believed they were 48 hours away from inheriting a $12 million empire and living out their wildest fantasies on a tropical island. They had absolutely no idea that I had just finished building their prison cell. I slipped the iPad back under the mattress padding and allowed my eyes to close. The psychological warfare was draining, but the finish line was finally in sight. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow, Jason would attempt to finalize his hostile takeover and officially authorize the removal of my life support. He would walk into this hospital room expecting to sign my death warrant. I was ready for him. I had survived their betrayal, their gaslighting, and their attempted murder. I was no longer a victim trapped in a comatose shell. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. Friday morning brought a sudden change in protocol. Instead of the horrible state-funded nursing home Patricia had recently described, Jason suddenly arrived with an expensive private medical transport team. A husband abandoning his disabled wife to a public facility right before seizing her company would raise immediate red flags. Jason needed to maintain the flawless facade of a grieving, devoted partner. He stood in the hospital corridor, loudly explaining to the attending physicians that he simply could not bear to be parted from his beloved wife. He insisted on bringing me home to care for me personally. The doctors praised his dedication, completely blind to the sinister reality. Brenda handled my discharge preparations. During the chaotic transition to the transport wheelchair, she slipped my tablet into the lining of my medical supply bag. I gave her one final firm blink of gratitude. The ride home was a masterclass in psychological endurance. Jason sat beside me in the transport van, holding my limp hand for the medical technicians. His grip was rigid and cold. The moment the technicians wheeled me through the front doors of my house and departed, Jason dropped my hand instantly. The heavy oak door closed, and the silence of my own home wrapped around me. It had been transformed into enemy territory. Melanie walked down the main staircase wearing my favorite cashmere sweater. She stepped lightly over the hardwood floors as if she owned the estate. Jason parked my wheelchair directly in the center of the living room facing the television. "Look who made it home," Melanie said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She peered into my face, waving a hand dismissively in front of my eyes. "Still completely vacant," she muttered. "I cannot believe you actually brought her back here, Jason. It is entirely creepy having her stare into space while we are trying to relax." Jason walked to the bar cart and poured a glass of bourbon. "It is a necessary strategic inconvenience," he explained. "The corporate lawyers require proof that I am fulfilling my marital obligations before they rubber stamp the equity transfer. Hosting a massive charity gala tomorrow night, with my tragic invalid wife, sitting front and center, guarantees my public image remains untouchable. Once the board hands over the keys, we can execute the medical removal directive." The psychological thriller playing out in my living room was terrifying. They left me parked in the wheelchair, treating me like a broken piece of furniture. I was forced to watch as they brazenly paraded their affair across my home. Melanie sat on Jason's lap on the velvet sofa, running her hands through his hair. They kissed passionately right in front of me, convinced my brain was dead. They openly discussed the details of the upcoming charity gala, planning the guest list using funds stolen from my fraudulent second mortgage. The sheer humiliation burned in my chest. I watched my sister try on my expensive jewelry, asking Jason which pieces she should wear to the gala. I forced my breathing to remain shallow and rhythmic. I kept my eyes dull and fixed on the television. Every time Melanie walked past my chair, she deliberately bumped my arm or dropped a cruel comment about my appearance. She fed off the power dynamic, enjoying the absolute helplessness of the sister she had always secretly envied. I swallowed the bitter taste of degradation, internalizing their every word. Their arrogance was blinding them to the ultimate reality. I was not a captive audience. I was the warden observing inmates who had not yet realized their cells were locked. Evening finally descended upon the house. Jason and Melanie ordered an expensive dinner, eating at my dining table while I sat ignored in the living room. Around midnight, they finally retreated upstairs to my master bedroom. I listened to their footsteps fade, followed by the heavy thud of my bedroom door closing. The house grew completely still. I waited another agonizing hour to ensure they were asleep. Slowly, methodically, I engaged my muscles. The stiffness from sitting in the wheelchair all day made every movement painful, but adrenaline masked the ache. I reached into the medical supply bag strapped to my chair and retrieved the hidden tablet. I lowered the screen brightness to its absolute minimum, casting a faint glow in the dark room. I opened the encrypted communication channel and sent a direct ping to Terrence. The response came immediately. Terrence was awake, fueled by the same relentless pursuit of justice. I typed a status update confirming my location and Jason's plan to utilize the charity gala as his final corporate takeover maneuver. Terrence replied with absolute precision. He confirmed that the Federal Bureau of Investigation dossier was fully compiled. He had successfully mapped every fraudulent wire transfer, traced the offshore accounts, and verified the fake notary stamps. Terrence explained that federal agents were reviewing the mountain of evidence and preparing the necessary arrest warrants. "We just need him to make the final public declaration," Terrence typed. "Once Jason stands on that stage and officially claims ownership of your company using those forged documents, he triggers the final federal threshold. The agents want to catch him in the absolute act of executing the fraud in front of high-profile witnesses." I read the message twice, committing the tactical plan to memory. Terrence was meticulously setting the stage for a public downfall. I typed a quick confirmation, assuring him I would maintain the vegetative act until the perfect moment. I deleted the chat history, cleared the cache, and returned the tablet to its hiding place. I leaned back in the wheelchair, staring into the dark shadows of my living room. Jason and Melanie thought they had successfully imprisoned me in my own home. They believed tomorrow night would be their ultimate victory lap, celebrating their stolen wealth. But they had fundamentally miscalculated the situation. Tomorrow night, the massive charity gala would undoubtedly be the premier event of their absolute financial ruin. Saturday morning arrived with an army of caterers, florists, and event planners swarming my property. The heavy scent of expensive lilies masked the underlying rot of what this day truly represented. Jason had spared no expense using the fraudulent home equity line of credit to fund a spectacular display of his new stolen wealth. I was wheeled into the corner of the living room early in the day, positioned like a tragic centerpiece while the chaos unfolded around me. Workers draped velvet over the dining tables and set up a massive champagne tower near the grand staircase. The sheer hypocrisy of the event was nauseating. Huge glossy banners were unrolled across the entrance hall, bearing my face alongside a heartbreakingly deceptive slogan, the Alyssa Recovery Foundation for Traumatic Brain Injury. Jason and Patricia had concocted this fake charity as the perfect vehicle to launder their stolen mortgage funds. By routing the money through a newly established nonprofit organization, they planned to wash the dirty cash under the guise of charitable donations, taking a massive tax write-off in the process. It was a classic embezzlement strategy dressed up in a tuxedo. Patricia swept through the front doors, mid-morning barking orders at the catering staff. She wore a tailored emerald gown that cost more than most people made in a month. She strutted past my wheelchair without even a glance of acknowledgement, focused on perfecting her role as the grieving, resilient mother. Jason joined her a few minutes later, holding a clipboard and looking incredibly pleased with himself. I listened as they reviewed the guest list. Jason had invited every major player in the Chicago tech scene, local politicians, and my highest-profile corporate clients. His objective was terrifyingly clear. He was going to use this emotional spectacle to publicly declare me permanently incapacitated. Then, under the guise of preserving my legacy, he would announce his immediate ascension as the new chief executive officer of my cybersecurity firm. With the entire elite community watching, he believed the corporate board would be publicly shamed into accepting the transition without a fight. Thought he was orchestrating a seamless, bloodless coup right in my own living room. But Jason made a fatal error in his planning. To make his fake charity look legitimate, he needed an established financial professional to audit the incoming donations. He had asked Terrence to handle the accounting. It was the equivalent of handing the keys of a vault directly to a federal investigator. Sitting perfectly still in my wheelchair, I replayed the encrypted messages Terrence and I had exchanged the night before. Terrence used his prestigious credentials and his flawless industry reputation to heavily alter the guest list. He convinced Jason that inviting key financial regulators would legitimize the charity and encourage bigger donations from the private sector. Jason, blinded by his own arrogance, agreed immediately. He had no idea that Terrence had extended invitations to 3 senior agents from the White-Collar Crime Division and 2 high-ranking officers from the Federal Regulatory Commission. These were not men coming to sip champagne and write tax-deductible checks. They were coming to witness a federal crime play out in real time. As the afternoon bled into the early evening, the house transformed into a glittering venue. The lighting was dimmed to a soft amber glow, and a string quartet began warming up on the back patio. Melanie descended the staircase wearing a stunning silver gown purchased with my drained checking account. She wore my diamond tennis bracelet and flashed a predatory smile at Jason. They shared a quick celebratory toast by the bar, oblivious to the tightening noose. I sat silently in the shadows of the living room, playing my part flawlessly. My muscles ached from the prolonged stillness, but my mind was a sharpened blade. I focused on the intricate details of the plan, ensuring I was mentally prepared for the physical exertion the night would require. The catering staff began circulating with silver trays of appetizers, and the first luxury vehicles pulled up the long, curving driveway. The valets rushed to open doors, ushering the city elite into the house. Jason walked over to my wheelchair, adjusting my blanket with a fake expression of deep sorrow for the arriving guests. He leaned down and whispered a vile insult into my ear, thinking I was completely hollow. He walked away to greet a local senator, leaving me alone in the dim corner. The trap was entirely set. The ultimate audience had arrived. Now the show could finally begin. The anticipation in my chest was a living, breathing entity. I watched Patricia float through the room accepting condolences from my business partners, while secretly calculating how quickly she could liquidate my remaining assets. She played the tragic mother role with a sickening level of dedication, wiping away invisible tears whenever a powerful executive walked past. I kept my breathing perfectly regulated. The challenge of remaining completely unresponsive amidst this infuriating spectacle tested every ounce of my willpower. But I knew the payoff would be worth every second of this temporary humiliation, every tear they shed, every fraudulent donation they accepted, and every lie they told to my colleagues only added more weight to the crushing federal charges waiting for them. Terrence arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, wearing a sharp-tailored suit. He walked through the front doors carrying a heavy leather briefcase that held the finalized forensic dossier. He made eye contact with me from across the crowded room. His face was a mask of cold professional detachment, but I saw the fire burning in his eyes. He gave a microscopic nod, confirming all the pieces were in place. The federal agents were already mingling in the crowd, disguised as wealthy philanthropists. Jason and Melanie were currently shaking hands with the very people who were about to put them in handcuffs. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially started just in front of me. The grand foyer of my home echoed with the clinking of crystal flutes and the low hum of affluent conversation. It was a lavish display funded entirely by the fraudulent home equity line of credit my husband Jason had deceitfully taken out against our home. Waiters in vests circulated balancing trays of caviar. A string quartet played on the patio, providing a soundtrack to this grotesque theater of hypocrisy. I remained perfectly still in my wheelchair, tucked away in the shadowy alcove beneath the stairs. I was a prop to them. A truly silent centerpiece designed to elicit maximum donations from the city elite. I kept my breathing shallow and my eyes fixed in a vacant stare. I had a perfect view of the living room. The sheer audacity of their performance was staggering. High-profile clients from my firm mingled with politicians and federal regulators. Jason had spared no expense to ensure the right people witnessed his ascension. He wanted the board members to see him as a resilient leader stepping up in a tragedy. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, gripping a glass of scotch and shaking hands. Melanie was actively working the crowd a few feet away. She was wearing my 3-carat diamond wedding ring directly on her right hand, flaunting it with aggressive arrogance. She laughed loudly at a joke made by one of my primary investors, resting her hand casually against Jason's arm. To the untrained eye, they looked like grieving relatives supporting each other. But I saw the subtle predatory dynamic. They radiated a toxic, triumphant energy. Melanie raised her glass in a toast, her stolen diamond catching the amber light of the chandeliers. She truly believed she had claimed everything I built as her own. Across the room, Patricia was putting on an equally revolting performance. My mother was surrounded by a cluster of wealthy women dabbing at her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I listened as her voice carried over the music. "It has just been the most devastating trial a mother could endure." Patricia sighed, placing a hand over her heart. "To see my brilliant daughter reduced to such a fragile state is a daily agony, but we have to remain strong. Jason and I are dedicated to preserving her legacy." The women murmured their sympathies, blind to the fact that Patricia was actively planning to dump me in a decaying state-funded nursing home tomorrow. She soaked up their pity to elevate her social standing. The tension in my chest tightened, but I maintained absolute physical control. Every person in this room was a witness to their massive federal fraud. Terrence moved silently through the crowd, checking his encrypted phone and making brief eye contact with the undercover agents positioned around the room. He was the invisible conductor of this impending raid, ensuring no one left early and no one suspected a thing. He walked past my alcove and paused, giving me the slightest nod of confirmation. The digital trap was fully armed and ready. A sharp, ringing sound echoed through the massive living room. Jason stood at the front tapping a silver spoon against his crystal flute. The string quartet immediately stopped playing their music. The murmuring crowd fell into a respectful hush, turning their attention to the man standing under the grand chandelier. A spotlight clicked on, illuminating Jason as he stepped up to a polished wooden podium set up specifically for this announcement. He looked out over the sea of wealthy guests and let out a deep, perfectly calculated sigh. He gripped the edges of the podium, bowing his head before speaking. Thank you all for being here tonight, Jason began, his voice thick with fake emotion. It means the world to our family to see so much support during what has undoubtedly been the darkest period of our lives. As many of you know, my beautiful, brilliant wife, Alyssa, suffered a catastrophic accident. The doctors have officially confirmed that the cognitive damage is severe and irreversible. He paused, pulling a pristine handkerchief from his pocket to wipe a non-existent tear. The audience let out a collective breath of sympathy. Patricia let out a loud, tragic sob from the front row, leaning heavily against Melanie. I watched the performance, feeling a cold, hard knot of pure adrenaline form in my stomach. Alyssa dedicated her entire existence to building a cybersecurity company that protects people. Jason continued, his voice gaining strength. She was a visionary. And it absolutely breaks my heart to see her confined to that wheelchair, unable to comprehend the incredible impact she has made. But her vision cannot die with her consciousness. Her company cannot be allowed to falter just because of this horrible tragedy. We must protect what she built. He looked directly at the corporate board members standing in the center of the room. The moment of his hostile takeover was finally here. That is why I have made the necessary decision to step forward. Jason declared, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. Through a durable power of attorney legally executed to protect her assets, I am officially assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer. I will guide her company into the future. The crowd began to politely applaud, unaware they were clapping for a violent corporate coup. As the applause rippled through the room, I watched Terrence smoothly detach himself from the crowd. He walked with silent, urgent purpose toward the back hallway of the house. He slipped through a heavy wooden door that led directly into the central audio-visual control room where the home theater and event projection systems were wired. The final phase was now in motion. Jason stood at the podium, soaking in the applause, preparing to unveil his fraudulent charity foundation. He had absolutely no idea that Terrence had just taken full control of the main projection system. The absolute darkness surrounding me was about to shatter and expose their lies to the entire world. The applause for Jason had barely reached its crescendo when the main spotlight abruptly died. The grand living room was plunged into immediate, startling darkness. The sudden absence of light was so jarring that the string quartet hit a discordant note before stopping entirely. The wealthy guests murmured in confusion, shifting uncomfortably in the pitch-black space. I could hear the rustle of expensive fabrics and the nervous clinking of crystal glasses as people wondered if this was a planned part of the presentation or a power failure. On the stage, Jason tapped the microphone, sending a dull thud echoing through the sound system. "Please remain calm, everyone," Jason announced, his voice laced with forced authority. "We seem to be experiencing a minor technical difficulty with the lighting panel. The auxiliary power will kick on momentarily." He was wrong. There was absolutely no technical difficulty. Terrence had executed his part of the plan with surgical precision. The darkness was the perfect cover I desperately needed. Sitting in the shadows of the alcove, I reached down and firmly unclasped the heavy medical blanket covering my lap. Beneath the oversized gray hospital sweater and thick wool throw, I was already dressed for war. I had meticulously coordinated with Brenda days earlier to smuggle my garments into the transport bag hidden beneath my medical supplies. I wore a sharp, tailored crimson power suit. It was the exact suit I wore the day I founded my cybersecurity firm. It was a vibrant, violent red that demanded absolute attention and projected unwavering authority. I slipped out of the bulky hospital sweater, letting it fall onto the empty seat of the wheelchair. The physical stiffness in my joints screamed in protest, but pure adrenaline flooded my veins, drowning out the pain. I placed my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. For the first time in weeks, I engaged my leg muscles, fully bearing my entire body weight. I stood up. A secondary spotlight snapped on, cutting the darkness. The beam did not point at the stage. Terrence had angled it directly at the base of the grand staircase, illuminating the exact path leading out of my dark alcove. I stepped forward into the harsh white light. My leather high heels struck the polished oak floor. Click. The sound was sharp and deliberate. Click. The guests nearest to the staircase turned their heads, trying to identify the source of the noise. Click. I took another step, emerging completely from the shadows. The murmurs of the crowd died instantly. A suffocating, absolute silence fell over the massive living room. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto me. They recognized the face from the tragic banners hanging in the foyer, but the woman standing before them did not match the narrative they had just been fed. I was not a fragile, broken shell confined to a wheelchair. I stood tall, my posture rigid and unyielding, wrapped in crimson silk and cold fury. The physical shock in the room was palpable. Someone in the front row let out a loud, ragged gasp. A woman dropped her crystal flute, and the glass shattered against the floor with a sharp, loud crack. The crowd stepped back, creating a wide path for me. My heels continued their steady, rhythmic beat against the hardwood. Each step was a hammer striking the final nails into my family's coffin. I kept my gaze locked dead ahead, focusing entirely on the three people whose lives I was about to dismantle. On the stage, Jason looked as though he had just seen a ghost claw its way out of a grave. All the blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a pale wax figure. His jaw hung open in slack-jawed terror. His hands began to violently shake. The microphone slipped from his trembling fingers, plummeting to the stage floor. It hit the wooden planks with a deafening screech of audio feedback that made the guests cover their ears, but Jason did not even flinch. He remained paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare he could not wake up from. To the right of the stage, Patricia physically recoiled. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers as she processed the impossible reality walking toward her. She stumbled backwards, her designer heels catching on the edge of the plush rug. She crashed into a cocktail table, sending a tray of appetizers scattering across the floor. She clutched her chest, gasping for air as if the oxygen had been vacuumed directly from her lungs. The grieving mother facade completely evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. She knew instantly that her elaborate scheme was entirely destroyed. Melanie stood frozen near the front row, the champagne glass in her hand tilted dangerously, spilling expensive liquor onto her silver gown. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. Her gaze darted from my face, down to my empty left hand, and then to her own right hand, where my stolen 3-carat diamond ring suddenly felt like a burning shackle. She instinctively tried to cover her hand with her clutch purse, shrinking back into the crowd like a cornered animal, realizing there was no escape. I reached the edge of the stage. The stairs seemed daunting for my recovering muscles, but I refused to show a single ounce of weakness. I gripped the wooden banister and ascended the steps with slow, deliberate grace. I stepped onto the platform and walked directly up to the podium. Jason scrambled backwards, backing away from me until his shoulders hit the heavy velvet curtain draped behind the stage. He was hyperventilating wildly as he stared at me in absolute horror. I did not reach for the dropped microphone. I did not need artificial amplification. The room was so perfectly quiet that my natural voice would carry to the very back walls. I stood at the podium, resting my hands on the polished wood. I looked down at Patricia, who was hyperventilating against the wall. I looked at Melanie, who was violently shaking. Finally, I turned my head and locked my eyes directly onto Jason. I allowed a cold, razor-sharp smile to spread across my face. "Did you really think I would let you win?" The echo of my question hung in the cavernous room. I did not wait for Jason to formulate a pathetic response. I reached down and picked up the microphone he had dropped. The audio feedback faded, leaving only the crisp amplification of my voice. Up in the audio-visual control room, Terrence took his cue. He hit play. The massive digital projector mounted high above the chandelier hummed to life. The heavy velvet curtains behind me were suddenly bathed in blinding light as a massive screen lowered from the ceiling. I turned to face the crowd of wealthy investors, politicians, and federal regulators. I welcomed them to the real presentation. The screen flashed brilliantly, and a high-definition video began to play. It was the nanny camera footage from my own living room. The image was undeniable. There was Jason, my grieving, devoted husband, and Melanie, my tragic, supportive sister, tangled together on my custom leather sofa. They were kissing passionately, tearing at each other's clothes with aggressive urgency. A collective wave of absolute disgust rippled through the hundreds of guests. I saw my primary investors exchanging horrified glances, but the affair was just the appetizer. I held up my hand, asking for silence. The video cut to a different timestamp, and the audio feed kicked in, echoing through the massive surround sound speakers of the gala. Jason's voice boomed across the room, complaining about finding only $50,000 in my checking account. Then came the lethal blow. Jason confessed loud and clear to paying a mechanic an untraceable cryptocurrency to cut my brake lines. Melanie responded with a cold, hollow laugh, agreeing with the plan and eagerly anticipating my death so they could sell the house and move to the islands. The entire ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. People gasped in pure terror. A city councilman near the front row literally stepped back as if Jason was a venomous snake. Attempted murder was now public knowledge broadcast in high definition. Jason lunged forward, his hands raised in a desperate panic, trying to shout over the audio, but his voice cracked and failed. He looked like a trapped rat completely surrounded by the very people he had tried to impress. I raised the microphone to my lips, my voice slicing through the escalating panic. That was just the beginning of their operation. I announced, my tone deadly and precise. Let us take a detailed look at the finances, shall we? Terrence executed the next transition. The video of the affair vanished, replaced by a series of crisp, highly detailed forensic accounting spreadsheets. The screen displayed the forged, durable power of attorney, right next to the fraudulent second mortgage Jason had taken out on this very house. Bright red arrows linked the stolen funds directly to offshore accounts. I narrated the financial flow with clinical detachment, explaining exactly how Jason wired hundreds of thousands of dollars to illegal underground sportsbooks to cover his massive gambling debts. The federal financial regulator standing in the crowd immediately pulled out their phones, taking pictures of the screen. Next, the projection shifted to Melanie and Patricia. The screen illuminated the $50,000 medical hardship transfer Melanie had stolen for her designer shopping spree. Then came Patricia's luxury first-class vacation to the French Riviera, booked with my stolen credit card. Patricia let out a horrific wail of defeat, trying to hide her face behind her hands, but the spotlight was relentless. I explained to the captivated audience that this entire charity gala was nothing but a sham. It was a poorly disguised money laundering operation designed to wash the fraudulent mortgage funds and secure Jason a permanent position as the chief executive officer of my company. The wealthy philanthropists who had brought their checkbooks tonight looked physically sick, realizing they were being used as pawns in a massive federal crime. I paced slowly across the stage, owning every single inch of the platform. You tried to bury me for a few $100,000, I said, directing my gaze straight at Jason, who was now weeping openly against the stage stairs. You committed wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder because you were too arrogant to realize how completely outmatched you were. The screen flashed one final time. A new document appeared displaying a highly secure offshore trust account. The balance glowed in bright green digits. $12 million. The crowd fell dead silent once again. I sold a single cybersecurity patent weeks before you cut my brakes. I explained, my voice echoing with absolute authority. I hid the funds behind a biometric encryption protocol that you could never dream of breaking. You destroyed your entire lives, you risked federal prison, and you shattered this family, all for absolute pennies. You thought you were corporate masterminds, but you were just common thieves digging around in the dirt while I held the keys to the kingdom. I turned to Melanie, who was sobbing violently into her hands, her stolen diamond ring catching the harsh light of the projector. I told her she could keep the ring because it was the only piece of wealth she would ever touch again. Then I looked at Patricia, my own mother, who was sliding down the wall in a state of total collapse. I promised her the state-funded nursing home she had threatened me with would feel like a luxury resort compared to the federal penitentiary waiting for her. The destruction of their reputations was complete and absolute. Every single person in the room, from the elite tech investors to the powerful local politicians, now viewed them with nothing but pure, unadulterated revulsion. They had invited the most influential people in Chicago to witness their triumph, and instead I had used their own stage to broadcast their ultimate execution. I lowered the microphone, taking a deep, victorious breath. The presentation was over, but the night was far from finished. For a split second, the grand living room remained trapped in a stunned, breathless vacuum. Then the reality of the broadcast shattered the silence. A cacophony of outraged whispers and disgusted gasps erupted from the crowd. The wealthy investors, politicians, and federal regulators immediately backed away, creating a massive physical void around my mother, sister, and husband. They were treated like an infectious disease. The elite guests whispered furiously to one another, pointing fingers and shaking their heads at the sheer audacity of the crimes they had just witnessed. Patricia could not handle the absolute destruction of her social standing. Her entire identity was built on the perception of wealth and maternal perfection. Watching the most powerful people in Chicago look at her with naked revulsion broke her completely. Her shock mutated into a feral, unhinged rage. Her face contorted into an ugly purple mask of fury. She let out a guttural shriek that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. She lunged forward, her manicured hands raised like claws, aiming directly for my face. She intended to drag me off the podium and silence me through pure physical violence. I did not even flinch. I stood my ground, watching her charge up the stage steps. Before she could cross the platform, a tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out from the shadows of the side corridor. Terrence moved with blinding speed and absolute precision. He intercepted Patricia effortlessly, grabbing her wrists and pinning her arms firmly to her sides. He spun her around, locking her in a rigid hold that completely neutralized her attack. Patricia thrashed and kicked her expensive emerald gown twisting around her legs, but Terrence held her with the immovable strength of a man who had just dismantled her entire criminal enterprise. "Let me go!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical desperation. "You ungrateful, wretched girl! I am your mother. I gave you life. You owe me everything. You cannot do this to me. You gave me life, and then you enthusiastically planned my death." I replied, my voice echoing coldly through the microphone. "You do not get to claim the title of mother anymore, Patricia. You are just a common thief who got caught." "I am taking my cut of this house," Patricia shrieked, struggling pointlessly against Terrence. "I am selling this mansion tomorrow. I will hire the best defense attorneys in the state. You will not see a single dime of your company when I am finished with you." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that silenced her frantic struggling. Terrence released his grip just enough to let her stand on her own 2 feet, though he remained positioned inches away, ready to subdue her again. "You are not selling anything," I informed her, leaning closer to the edge of the podium. "In fact, you do not even have a place to sleep tonight." Patricia froze, her chest heaving as she stared at me with wild, terrified eyes. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. I looked over at Terrence, giving him the floor. He straightened his suit jacket and looked down at his mother-in-law with pure, uncompromising disdain. "As a certified public accountant, I have a legal and ethical obligation to report suspicious financial activities to the proper authorities," Terrence stated, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "When I tracked the fraudulent home equity line of credit Jason took out on Alyssa's house, I noticed a massive discrepancy in your personal portfolio, Patricia. You used stolen funds to artificially inflate your own credit score and secure the mortgage on your primary residence. I flagged those fraudulent loans directly to your lending institution 48 hours ago. Patricia's jaw dropped, her eyes darting between Terrence and me in absolute horror. The bank initiated an emergency asset freeze and an immediate foreclosure. Terrence continued delivering the fatal blow with clinical detachment. The paperwork was expedited due to the ongoing federal investigation. The bank locked the doors and seized the property this morning while you were busy ordering flowers for this ridiculous party. You do not own a home, Patricia. You are officially completely homeless. You do not possess a single liquid asset to your name. Patricia collapsed onto her knees. Her legs simply gave out beneath the crushing weight of her total ruin. She stared blankly at the hardwood floor, her mouth opening and closing silently. The arrogant, manipulative woman who had mocked my paralysis and stolen my wedding ring was gone, replaced by a destitute criminal facing the absolute end of her life. Before anyone could process the reality of Patricia's sudden homelessness, a new sound pierced the heavy atmosphere of the gala. It started as a faint wail in the distance, rapidly growing louder and more intense. The distinct blare of police sirens echoed through the night air. Red and blue emergency lights began to flash wildly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the living room walls in frantic alternating colors. The federal agents had arrived. Terrence had coordinated the timing perfectly. The sound of the sirens snapped Jason out of his paralyzed state. Pure survival instinct overrode his shock. He looked at the flashing lights, then looked at the front doors where federal agents were already visible marching up the front steps. Panic consumed him entirely. He abandoned Melanie without a second thought. He shoved past a group of terrified investors knocking a waiter to the ground and sprinted madly toward the back terrace doors. He intended to disappear into the dark, sprawling gardens behind the estate. Jason slammed into the heavy glass doors, bursting out onto the patio. He took 3 desperate strides across the stone pavers. He did not make it to the 4th. 2 massive undercover federal agents who had been posing as wealthy philanthropists near the buffet table burst through the doors right behind him. They moved with terrifying efficiency. The lead agent lunged forward, wrapping his arms around Jason's waist and driving a shoulder hard into his spine. The impact was brutal and loud. Jason was lifted entirely off his feet and slammed face first into the hard stone patio. The second agent dropped his entire body weight onto Jason's legs, pinning him securely to the ground. Jason screamed in pain and terror, thrashing wildly against the cold stone. "Get off me!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "I did not do anything. She is crazy. It was all a mistake." "Save it for the judge," the lead agent growled, pulling Jason's arms aggressively behind his back. The sharp metallic clicking of handcuffs echoed loudly across the patio. It was the most beautiful, satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute finality. Inside the living room, uniformed police officers and additional federal agents swarmed the gala. They moved with absolute authority, taking complete control of the environment. An agent marched directly up to Melanie, who was cowering near the champagne tower. She sobbed hysterically, holding her hands up in surrender as the agent forcefully grabbed her wrists and spun her around. The handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, locking right next to my stolen 3-carat diamond ring. "I did not know," Melanie wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Jason made me do it. It was his idea. Please, Terrence, help me. Tell them I am innocent." Terrence looked at his wife with a gaze so incredibly cold, it could have frozen the entire room. He turned his back on her entirely, refusing to offer a single word of comfort. 2 officers hauled Patricia up from the floor. She was completely unresponsive, a catatonic shell of a woman, as they secured her wrists in iron cuffs. She did not fight them. She simply stared straight ahead, completely broken by the absolute loss of her wealth, her home, and her freedom. I stood tall on the stage, watching the officers march my husband, my sister, and my mother through the crowd of horrified guests. The city elite parted ways, avoiding any physical contact with the criminals being paraded through my grand foyer. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated their tear-stained, panicked faces as they were shoved out the front doors and pushed roughly into the back of the waiting police cruisers. The nightmare was finally over. The house belonged to me again. The immediate aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of federal depositions and forensic audits. Terrence had handed the authorities a perfect, mathematically flawless roadmap of my family's criminal enterprise. The federal prosecutors did not even need to negotiate. The evidence was so overwhelmingly undeniable that the trial was merely a rapid formality. I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse, watching the absolute destruction of the people who thought they could casually erase my existence. Jason stood before the judge looking nothing like the polished, charismatic salesman who had tried to steal my empire. His tailored suits were replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His arrogant posture had completely collapsed under the crushing reality of his situation. The judge did not show a single ounce of leniency. For the charges of attempted murder, wire fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy, Jason was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He broke down sobbing openly in the courtroom, begging for a mercy he never once showed me. Melanie and Patricia stood next to him, physically trembling as their own sentences were handed down. Patricia tried one last time to play the victim, weeping and claiming she was entirely manipulated by Jason. The judge coldly reminded her of the audio recording where she enthusiastically detailed her plan to dump her paralyzed daughter into a decaying facility to rot. For their active participation in the massive financial fraud and the conspiracy to cover up an attempted murder, both Melanie and Patricia received 10 hard years in federal prison. They were escorted out of the courtroom in heavy iron shackles. My mother could not even look at me as the bailiff guided her through the heavy oak doors. 1 week after the sentencing, I made a single final trip to the federal correctional facility. I sat in the stark visitor room, staring through the thick, reinforced glass partition. Jason was escorted to the opposite side, sitting down heavily and picking up the black plastic telephone receiver. His eyes were hollow, completely devoid of the greedy light that used to animate him. He looked at me, expecting anger or perhaps a lingering trace of the love I once had for him. He found absolutely nothing but cold, empty detachment. I did not pick up my telephone receiver to speak to him. There were no words left to say. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. They were the finalized divorce papers, completely stripping him of any marital claim to my assets, my properties, or my company. I held the documents flat against the thick glass, ensuring he could read the bold print at the top. I produced my favorite silver fountain pen, the exact same pen he had tried to force into my paralyzed hand just weeks ago. With slow, deliberate precision, I signed my name at the bottom of the page. My signature was sharp, aggressive, and perfectly legible. I slid the papers into an envelope and handed them to the armed guard standing nearby to process. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the prison without ever looking back, leaving him trapped behind the glass forever. Fast forward 6 months. The horrific memories of the hospital bed felt like a distant, fading nightmare. I stood looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my newly acquired penthouse office in downtown Chicago. The skyline stretched out endlessly, reflecting the bright morning sun. My cybersecurity firm had not just survived the attempted hostile takeover, it had expanded exponentially. The publicity from the trial had inadvertently showcased my impenetrable digital defense systems, bringing in a massive wave of high-profile corporate clients. We were stronger and more financially secure than ever before. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open, and Terrence walked in carrying a sleek tablet and a stack of quarterly financial reports. He wore a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, his presence commanding absolute respect. After Melanie went to prison, Terrence filed for divorce and completely liquidated their shared assets, leaving her with absolutely nothing to return to. I had immediately offered him the official position of Chief Financial Officer for my entire multi-million-dollar enterprise. It was the easiest and smartest business decision I ever made. The federal auditors cleared the final recovery of the stolen mortgage funds this morning, Terrence announced, placing the tablet on my massive mahogany desk. The accounts are completely restored, and the offshore trust remains entirely untouched. We are officially in the green, Alyssa. We project a 40% revenue increase by the end of the fourth quarter. I turned away from the window and smiled at the man who had helped me burn a criminal empire to the ground. Thank you, Terrence, I said, walking over to the private bar cart nestled in the corner of the office. I pulled out a bottle of vintage scotch, the good stuff reserved for absolute victories, and poured two neat glasses. I handed one to my chief financial officer. Terrence accepted the glass, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his usual stoic professional demeanor. We built a flawless defense, he said, raising his glass toward the sunlight streaming through the windows. We outsmarted the predators who thought we were easy prey. To the absolute truth, I replied, clinking my glass against his. The sharp ring of crystal echoed in the sprawling penthouse, a beautiful sound of pure, untainted victory. We drank the scotch, savoring the rich warmth of success and absolute freedom. I walked back over to the expansive windows, looking down at the bustling city below. I took a deep breath, feeling the pure strength in my lungs, the solid ground beneath my feet, and the total control I now possessed over my own destiny. I looked directly forward, no longer speaking to Terrence or the empty room, but to anyone out there who might be listening. They thought they could bury me because I was quiet. They mistook my loyalty for weakness and my love for blindness. They believed that, because we shared the same blood, I would simply lie down and let them consume my life. But blood does not make a family. Blood is just a biological coincidence. True family is built on uncompromising loyalty, absolute respect, and showing up when the darkness feels completely overwhelming. If the people who are supposed to protect you decide to sharpen their knives and treat you like prey, you do not owe them your silence. You do not owe them your compliance. You establish an impenetrable boundary, and you fight back with every single weapon at your disposal. Never let anyone convince you that protecting your own life and your own peace is a betrayal. The only betrayal is allowing toxic people to drag you into their grave. I woke up paralyzed in a hospital bed surrounded by monsters holding shovels. Now I stand at the top of an empire and they are locked in a concrete cage. Your power belongs to you. Never let them take it. One of the most profound and resonant lessons to emerge from Alyssa's harrowing journey is the realization that blood does not inherently define a family. Loyalty, respect, and unconditional support do. Society often conditions us to believe that we must endlessly forgive and accommodate our relatives, no matter how deeply they hurt us, simply because of biological ties. Alyssa's story systematically dismantles this toxic myth. For years, Alyssa sought the approval of a mother who viewed her merely as a financial asset, and she trusted a husband and sister who were willing to orchestrate her demise for their own selfish gain. She was trapped by the illusion of familial obligation. However, her ultimate salvation and triumph did not come from her blood relatives, but rather from the allies she found in the darkest moments of her life: a courageous night shift nurse and an uncompromising brother-in-law. These individuals demonstrated what true family looks like, showing up, standing firm, and offering protection when it matters most. The narrative teaches us a vital lesson about self-preservation. It reminds us that walking away from abusive, manipulative people is not an act of cruelty or a betrayal of family values. It is an essential act of self-love. We do not owe our peace, our resources, or our lives to those who treat us as prey. Alyssa's transformation from a paralyzed, gaslit victim into the architect of her own justice illustrates the undeniable power of setting ironclad boundaries. By shedding the guilt associated with cutting off toxic relatives, we make room to build a chosen family rooted in mutual respect. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships in your own life and have the courage to establish the boundaries necessary to protect your absolute peace.